Welcome back to He's a Giant, a pod about all things college football and all things Giants football. And today, a special episode about all things dumpster fire. New York Giants fix this shit way too early to go over the GM and head coach review episode. What's going on, Monty?
What's going on, man? Yeah, as requested by you guys, we had a lot of people asking us when we're going to have this episode. I think Sal and I would like to, really go into a more in-depth dive when we get closer. But, you guys wanted this, so we wanted to give you something. So we're going to, talk to you about, some of the prototypes we're going to look for in our draft. And then we also have, a couple names each for each of these. Both of us did a guy, and we'll go through them. I think it'll be a fun exercise and, some guys to, keep an eye on at both the head coach and GM position as we move through this dumpster fire of a season.
And as always, we at He's a Giant Pod are not officially yet sponsored by Celsius brand energy drink. Celsius Sparkling Grape, the official drink of He's a Giant Pod. It is excellent. It is delicious. And we would welcome the Celsius official page to sponsor us as their biggest fans from a New York Giants pod. So for those of you who care, get some Celsius. My favorite flavor is sparkling grape. There are many delicious flavors. And make sure to tag official Celsius to let them know they need to sponsor He's a Giant Pod.
No free ads though, so hit us up.
If we weren't independently wealthy, we wouldn't be able to do this, right? Well, right, Monty? Monty comes from a lot of money. That's how we're funding all this.
Oil money. Like
Oil
Johnny
money.
Manziel.
He drills in the Northeast. Nobody knows about it. All right. So we have been doing our usual weekly episodes going through college football. We're almost about halfway through our prospects, if I'm not mistaken, right? By our position group. So we decided, you know what? Let's take a break and do this because let's face it, we had so much optimism coming off that win against the Chargers. We're 1-3, looking back at the record, thinking, all right, if Dart had come in earlier, maybe we're 2-3. I mean, 2-2 or even 3-1. The New Orleans Saints loading up, a team that was winless. The game by every right the Giants should have won. My friends here know the story. I told Monty the story Sunday. I had family plans at the time of the game. I left my house just for one, got to the place I was going to. I checked my phone. It is 14-3 Giants. And I'm like, cool, we're good here. Had to put my phone away. We had to go zip lining. So put all my stuff away, go up in the trees for hours, come back down. Next thing I know, I turn on my phone. I'm like, wait a minute, we're down 19-14. And then I check again a second later and it's 26-14. And it says fumble recovery. That's all she wrote. Everybody knows the story. 5 turnovers in a row, and the Giants blow a very winnable game. A game that was lost because of the human error of players. But I think it goes to the bigger point, Monty, that every week this team just finds ways to lose. They are an ill-prepared football team. They do what bad football teams do. They just lose. They figure it out. And it's sad to see this happen. So in any case, here we are at 1-4 now, and staring down the barrel of a nasty part of the schedule. We have the Eagles tomorrow night at home with no receivers on the roster, mind you. Our starting 3 receivers are scheduled to be Jalen Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Bo Collins.
Yep.
Bo Collins, who was not even good at Notre Dame. Sorry, T. He's now our starting wide receiver.
And they refuse to add a wide receiver.
They haven't added one, despite Malik Neighbors being hurt for more than a week now and gone for the season, despite there being almost no depth at the position starting the season. Here we are. We're also pretty thin at other positions like linebacker. Our secondary unit is a bit of a strange unit because the guys are not playing well. I think that's more scheme and coaching than it is just pure talent. But there's certainly guys who are just playing poorly. There's a lot wrong with this team.
Yeah, I mean, you added a bunch of press man corners and are not pressing them. So not playing to the strength of your team.
Which goes to the bigger picture, right? Philosophically, where are the Giants? Because we're 4 years into this regime at this point, in the middle of the 4th year, and the results just keep getting worse and worse and worse. And I think it's almost a foregone conclusion at this point. I think you would agree that barring some miracle, Brian Dable's gone. Right? Yep. He can't survive what's about to happen. But then what happens with Joe Shane?
Mhm.
That's where we start this conversation. What are your thoughts on where this stands with Joe Schoen before we get into the rest of this episode?
I think there were some talks going into the season and even early into the season. It was like, yeah, maybe Brian Dable's on the hot seat, but I think Joe Schoen's safe. That was kind of the sentiment. And I know you and I were kind of like, sure, I believe that is the case right now. But
Yeah.
things can change and things can change quickly. And, that was an argument I used for Brian Dable. And it's an argument I use for Joe Schoen as well. I think you come off of that Saints game, and there's a lot of people to blame. The execution, the players themselves are to blame. The coaching and how prepared they look are to blame. And then, I think a lot of people came out of that more than most games saying like, what is Joe Schoen doing? Because we don't have wide receiver depth. Jalen Hyatt, and when you're forced to put a guy like Jalen Hyatt on the field, who you traded up to get, it really emphasizes how bad of a pick that is. When you put Deonte Banks on the field and he continues to struggle, it shows how bad of a pick that was. And more that gets emphasized. And I think that that was a big game for kind of putting a nail into Joe Schoen's coffin. He can still save, but I think we're heading down that road. He's going to get fired. And I see some people in the chat maybe saying it. Maybe they were talking about a different report and didn't mean Schwartz, but there was a Paul Schwartz article that came out today. Paul Schwartz, a mouthpiece for the New York Giants. Paul Schwartz, who never says anything that the New York Giants don't want him to say, seemingly.
Yep.
And he came out and criticized Joe Schoen and criticized Brian Dable and criticized their draft picks and their unwillingness to move on from those draft picks, which is a criticism you and I have had for a while, but not a criticism the mouthpieces of the New York Giants have had. And I can go on about some more mouthpieces that have done that. I'm not trying to call a ton of names, but you can see the movement coming where the marching orders have been sent and there is no longer a defense seemingly out there for Joe Schoen. Unlike last year where you had, the head of the New York Giants PR talking Giants guys and screaming at them for suggesting that they should fire Joe Schoen. Big change from there. So I think we're heading towards Joe Schoen being fired, but we still have time. What about you?
Yeah, I don't think you can understate the importance of a piece like what Paul Schwartz put out today. And not that he's one of my, most trustworthy writers or anything.
No.
Not at all. But he absolutely has a history of essentially echoing the sentiments that are preferred by ownership. That is his history. It is pretty well documented. That's always been his point. When often against the Tides, by the way, like when the Tides and the sentiment and all logic would say, it's time to criticize the team, the front office. Out of nowhere, you'll see a Paul Schwartz piece saying that something along the lines of, the general manager and head coach have the full faith and confidence of the owner. And you're like, whoa, where did this come from? Right. But he's always echoing and essentially telling you what's going on at 1925 Giants Drive. He's telling you what ownership often feels. And the way I interpret today's piece from him is he either, at minimum, he did not receive pushback from writing a piece that he felt he needed to write about failures of the current regime and their drafting, coaching, and their just inability to recognize failed players and move off of them. So either he himself felt like that, and at minimum, he did not get pushback in publishing that piece from ownership, which is quite telling in itself because it's an indictment of the general manager and the head coach, or he got supportive, information from ownership to basically help piece together that article that he wrote, almost coming from ownership to some degree, which, quite frankly, he's done that before, right? At least we suspect he's done that before.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think it's more the latter, but either way, any way you look at it or interpret it, it's ownership saying, yeah, you want to take a hit piece out on Joe Schoen, go right ahead at minimum. Or it's either do it for us or go ahead and do it. We're not going to stop you. They are beginning to manufacture consent. I don't know who they think they need to manufacture it for, but they're just beginning to manufacture public consent for being able to look at Joe Schoen at the end of the season and say, we gave you 4 years. It didn't work. Team's not good. Everybody's going. I think that's where we're headed right now.
Except for our guy, Chris Rossetti in the chat. He can stick around because he's a giant viewer.
Chris Rossetti must, well, at least this Chris Rossetti. I'm not sure if it's the same Chris Rossetti. I'm sorry, Chris. I'm sure you are, but hard to tell.
No definitive proof.
We just don't have proof. If you want to grab a guest video mic here, we'll be happy to give it to you.
We get an email directly from his Giants email.
Yeah, you just send it to us. We'll bring you on as a guest. Pat Hanlon's gonna probably figure out what our cell phone numbers are and start calling us during the episode. It'll be fun. But I think it's definitely laying the groundwork for separating Giants ownership from Joe Schoen, and the path to 6 wins or less, or 5 wins or 3 wins or whatever it's going to be is usually an ugly path. We talked about this, right? Like you can say, oh, well, it's a hard schedule, or it's a new quarterback. You can say that all you want and that they're going to be patient. But when losses mount during the season, sentiments change and it gets ugly. So anyway you slice it, they're basically laying the groundwork for possibly moving on, which brings us to this episode. It is time to start talking about what life looks like after the Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll era, which does seem to be headed for a crash course to conclusion at the end of this year. So we took the liberty of debating amongst ourselves how we would approach this. And we came up with a couple of different ways. What we wanted to do was break down both our head coaches and our general managers and the options for them, at least the initial options, into different types of prototypes. And we'll walk you through them. And I'll just mention them to you in terms of the categories. Each of us selected a person for each category. So the first category we chose for head coach, and we'll go through the head coaches first, was a proven head coach. The second head coach is what we called a retread head coach. So this is typically a proven head coach in the past who needs a little rehabilitation to get another job.
Yeah, somebody who's had the experience, but isn't necessarily somebody that teams are jumping on to giving a new job.
Right. The third prototype was the offensive coordinator prototype. We're familiar with that. The next prototype was the defensive coordinator prototype. The next category was a college head coach prototype, which is very interesting, actually, in my mind. And then we picked a wild card option for each one. Somebody who may not be viewed as a head coach candidate right away, but should be considered for the position. So each of us picked a person for each of these prototypes, and we'll start there, and then we'll go to GM. So Monty, why don't you start with your proven head coach choice, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So we had a little bit guess here because we don't know who is going to shake loose at the end of the season. So we're making some assumptions about guys who may potentially shake loose. I think we both have really interesting options. One I've been advocating for on Twitter a little bit, and that's John Harbaugh from the Baltimore Ravens. I think that there's a real opportunity that John Harbaugh could shake loose. I mean, the Ravens are having, a very, very bad season so far, and Lamar Jackson's hurt, and that doesn't seem like that's going to change anytime soon. He's been, their head coach. This is his 19th season with them. It's been there for a long time, and there has been some pushback from Baltimore Ravens fans recently. We've seen a lot of fans who want John Harbaugh fired. The reason I mentioned Philadelphia reminds me a little bit of, the end of Andy Reid in Philadelphia. I think Andy Reid's a much better coach than John Harbaugh is or was. But you heard a lot of the same things. Like we talk about Andy Reid's clock management ability and his game management, and how they were starting to lose and they had a really bad season. They had 4 wins that year. I think and ultimately they made the decision, and because they couldn't get over the top, which again sounds similar to me, to John Harbaugh. And I think just because the Ravens are moving on from, which I wouldn't blame them for, the Ravens, have a MVP quarterback and they haven't been able to get over the top, whether that's John Harbaugh's fault or not. At some point, you got to try something new. And I think that there's a reality that they coming off a bad season with a guy like maybe a Jesse Minter out there who came from a tree, and we'll talk about him at some point. It could be a natural fit, and I think they can move on from him. So John Harbaugh to the New York Giants. Why I think it makes sense here. I think it just, at the very least, I think it adds some much needed stability to this program. I saw somebody at one point, and I think this is more on the lower side. I think there could be a higher side, but somebody, kind of comped it to when the Knicks got Tom Thibodeau, and how, you knew he wasn't necessarily going to bring a championship, but he got you back to relevancy. And I don't necessarily, John Harbaugh has gotten a championship, and I still think he could do that if he got that. But at the very least, I think that he could have a similar effect to that. I think he's a guy who's been very good at player development. He has, put players in the right place. He's one of the best staff builders I've seen. Consistently adds great staff and moves on when, whether it's Greg Roman had to do a great job early on with Lamar Jackson, but when it was time to move on, it was time to move on. Wink Martindale did a fantastic job, one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. When it was time to move on, it was time to move on. And he had no problem replacing those guys with great coordinators. That is what good coaches do. I think he's just the overall, executive head coach, and would bring to, in my opinion, the best front office in the NFL. He would bring some of that, and he already has to work with that. You'll have guys that excites me. I think you can build staff. 186 and 119 is his record. He's been a coach of the year. He's won, 6 AFC North titles. He's won a Super Bowl. So John Harbaugh is who I'd advocate for. What are your thoughts on that, Sal?
I just want to go through. I see a lot of people in the chat echoing a lot of statements I've seen about Harbaugh lately. Like, he's a no for me. I don't want him, this and that. Right. And I get it. People have this negative view because they feel like he's not good enough to get the Ravens over the top. I understand that view, but think about where we are as a franchise, right? We've had 100 losses in the last however many years, right? It's just us and the Jets, in the last 10 years or so, with 100 losses. That's who we are. We're perpetually a double-digit loss team. This is John Harbaugh's win-loss record since his head coaching career began in Baltimore in 2008. He's been there this is his 18th year as head coach. Started at age 46. He's now 63. These are his records, Monty. 11-5, 9-7, 12-4, 12-4, 10-6, 8-8, 10-6, 5-11, 8-8, 9-7, 10-6, 14-2, 11-5, 8-9, 10-7, 13-4, 12-5, and this year so far 1-4.
One season under 8 wins, and most of them double digits.
Right, and we have people saying, "No, this is not good enough for me."
Look, I understand that the Ravens have a very good front office, and he benefits a lot from that. They've had a couple different GMs during this time, 2 very good ones, and Ozzie Newsome and Eric DeCosta. But who's been the consistent over that time? It's been John Harbaugh. And head coach has a large part in a good organization, a well-run organization. Head coach has a very large part in drafting players, in picking free agents, in developing of those players. That is the head coach's job. And I think that he would bring, somebody from a very talented front office that he knows how to work with. And I think that would be a beautiful start for a good foundation here.
Yeah. I see people commenting about things like, oh, he's stale, or, it helps to not miss in the draft. Absolutely. You know what? when you hire a guy like Harbaugh, you're talking about a cultural shift in the organization. You're not just hiring the coach, you're hiring the coach who's going to hire his GM. He's going to bring somebody almost certainly from the Ozzie Newsome tree. Why wouldn't he? His brother got a job and took somebody from the Ozzie Newsome tree as his GM and selected him. That would be the dynamic that we're going for here. And, I can hear arguments both pro and cons, but like you're talking about a proven winner, a Super Bowl champion, a consistent winner, a guy who at every position group on that team, people are punching above their weight. There's not a single position group consistently on that team that you look at and say, oh, guys are not performing. Their problem and their complaints as a fan base is not that they're not good. It's that they can't get over the hump. Well, I'm sorry, but I have news for Ravens fans. One, you're always there, which is better than most people. Two, you're in the AFC. You're going against Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. It's tough, specifically Mahomes. And three, when you're at that level and you're in those games, it ain't the coach that wins those games, my friends. It's the quarterback. And say what you want about their MVP, but his weakest moments have been in those big playoff games. That is the hard reality that they have to kind of grapple with. And that's not to say he won't get over the top. I'm a big Lamar Jackson believer. I think he's going to get a Super Bowl at some point, and I'm pretty certain he's going to be one of the great quarterbacks in NFL history. But if the complaint about Harbaugh is you haven't won a title, that's a pretty first world problem to have.
Yeah. That's what I've been trying. I'm champagne problems, and I'm here for that at this point.
Right. So I think he's a stability hire, right? And I would be thrilled if we got John Harbaugh. So I definitely am against people who say don't touch him. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think that you can have teams that successful and that good with every player you draft and bring in at every position group and that fundamentally sound without having a sound coaching staff in control of things. And I think he brings that. So he's a good candidate in my opinion.
And it's funny too. And again, guy we'll talk about, but like a Jesse Minter, big fan favorite for New York Giants fans as a potential head coach candidate. Where Jesse Minter started? Under Harbaugh, because Harbaugh consistently builds a good staff, finds good talent on both the coaching staff and as players. It's been proven time and time again.
So now that we pissed many of you off, let's go on to my choice for the proven head coach. And I've discussed this with people recently. My choice for a proven head coach, if he were to shake loose. By the way, it should be mentioned that Harbaugh just signed a 3-year extension in March. Head coaches will always do that going into their final year of their contract. That doesn't stop teams from firing them or releasing them of their contract and them going elsewhere. So, if the relationship has come to a conclusion, which it might, he'll be available. Which is the same for the guy I am looking at. My candidate for a proven head coach is Pittsburgh Steelers' current head coach, Mike Tomlin. Another guy who year after year is a consistent and proven winner. A guy who always has his team in the playoffs, a guy who raises the floor of every single player that touches that roster, and who, for whatever reason, is grappling with, whether or not he's going to remain a Steeler every single year. It is an issue continuously. He also got an extension to stay through the 2027 season. Yes, we know he's not going to get fired, Alex. That's not the point. But guys like this don't get fired. They divorce the team. They come to mutual agreement that they're going to move on. So if this relationship reaches its end, if Tomlin says to the Steelers, I would like to be released of my contract, and they want to go in a different direction also, maybe a trade can be worked out for a guy like Mike Tomlin. I do think Tomlin is a guy you probably would have to consider trading for. But if that happened, if the Steelers decided to go in another direction, and I wouldn't put anything past that organization at this point because they put their fate in the hands of Aaron Rodgers. And one thing we know about Aaron Rodgers is he's like a universe destroyer. Right now they're okay, but we have seen Aaron Rodgers just sink ships, with when losses pile up. If they do start piling up, he can be a destructive force. It is a real issue here. So if he becomes available, I would love to get my hands on Mike Tomlin. What's his background? He's been their head coach since 2007. He has a defensive background and special teams background. He has balanced offenses. He is known as Mr. Consistency. doesn't have losing seasons, has never had a losing season also in 18 years. His regular season head coaching record is 186 wins, 108 losses, and 2 ties. His playoff record is 8 wins and 10 losses with an overall record of 194 to 118 and 2. He did win Super Bowl 53 in 2008. He was runner-up 2 years later in the Super Bowl. He was the youngest head coach to win a Super Bowl at the age of 36. He holds the NFL record for most consecutive non-losing seasons of 18. He has 7 division titles under his name. Defensively, his scheme is typically a Tampa 2 cover defense. That's because he trained under Tony Dungy, the man who developed it. And he has a balanced zone rushing offense. His coaching tree, not quite as robust, but he has good. He began his career under Tony Dungy and John Gruden, and his pro did include assistants like Matt Canada. Not the best, but still, he has guys there. What Mike Tomlin brings to an organization, if he were to become available, if you could get your hands on Mike Tomlin, is very similar to John Harbaugh. He is a stabilizing force for your organization, and he is immediately the alpha in the room. He takes over, right? Mike Tomlin comes in, he's in charge. He will run the organization. He will also bring an executive that matches his style. He will bring the front office with him. He will choose his assistants, and he is going to set the culture of the organization. I think that's a big thing about Mike Tomlin. He's a culture setter. We badly could use it, right? We're coming off a game where we're losing football games because we're fumbling the football and making sloppy mistakes, which is something we do, unfortunately, way too much. Tomlin's a guy where you just don't see his teams do that too much. They don't lose football games because of bad play. They lose football games because they're not as good as the other team, but they won't kill themselves often with Mike Tomlin as coach. They're fundamentally sound. They're smart. They make good decisions. That he changes the culture. You see guys consistently produce with the Pittsburgh Steelers, especially wide receivers, who when they leave that organization become like absolute maniacs who cannot be controlled by anybody.
Every time.
Mike Tomlin is a coach's coach. He is in charge of that locker room. That's a guy, if you could get your hands on him, you never again worry about, do I have the right coach? You know he's taking care of business. Then you can clearly assess, do I have the right players? Which is a whole different situation. So it's a long shot, admittedly, but every year he's flirting with leaving the Steelers, every single year. And if that opportunity were there and you had to make a trade for Mike Tomlin, if Chris Mara's, brother-in-law in the Rooney family called him, right, and said, "Hey, Chris, let's get the family together to talk about a trade here. Mike would like to be a Giant. We're moving on. We would like some compensation. We would like something in the trade." Chris Mara and John Mara, God willing, and others say, "Okay, we'd love to have Mike here. What's it going to cost?" And they say, "We want your second round pick in this upcoming draft for Mike Tomlin." Do you make that trade?
Absolutely. I'd make that trade.
"We want your first round pick in this class."
I would do a first round pick swap and drop back to them so they can get a quarterback.
So that's a viable question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is Mike Tomlin worth losing? The Giants right now are probably going to pick top 10, top 5, somewhere in there. The Steelers will probably pick in the top, let's say top 20. All right. You're going to drop down 5, 10, 12 spots. Would you drop down in the draft to get a coach like Mike Tomlin? And I think the answer probably is yes.
I'd also probably consider a 2027 pick and just bank on Mike Tomlin winning enough games for me that it was worth it.
I think that's the kind of question that you'd have to ask yourself about if he becomes available. Mm-hmm. Are you willing to give up compensation? It's also possible that out of respect for him, the Rooneys just let him go. If he decides, I want to leave, right? They might just say, "Look, you've been a great coach for us for 2 decades. We're going a different direction. You're going a different direction. You absolve us of this contract. You go your separate way, and we'll let you go." That's possible too. But he's so good that if they ask for compensation, I think you're not going to get any player with as much impact on your organization as a coach of this caliber. So I think this is one of the. There's only like a handful of guys in the NFL I would trade for. He's one of them.
Yeah. And it's 2 really interesting candidates between Harbaugh and Tomlin. And I think the overall, talking about this prototype, the proven head coach, I think it would be so important for this team for a lot of reasons. I think bringing some stability and just knowing you have a guy would be a good start. I think having, that resume to bring to ownership and finally, I think be able to push back and get ownership less involved is having a guy who has won a Super Bowl, who's been here, who has respect around the league. I think having that guy come in, bring in his own front office, I think that's the best way to finally get this front office or this ownership to kind of back out of things. The other thing we've talked about is, Mike Tomlin for almost 2 decades now has worked with basically this family. I mean, it's the Mara Rooneys. They're as close as it gets. And, the Rooneys meddling hasn't led to the losing it has with the Giants, but don't get it twisted. They are just as involved. They are all over that front office. It's the same thing, but they handle it. Mike Tomlin and that front office have managed it. I know a lot of people hate on Jerry Reese, but Jerry Reese for a long time handled it very well. Eventually lost control when Chris Mara got his promotion, and among other things, I'm not going to absolve Jerry Reese. Obviously, we're not going to get into that conversation, but for a while it was handled well. Tom Coughlin and Jerry Reese handled it, and then they lost control. And that's something over 20 years Mike Tomlin has not lost. He has kept control of that team, and through even a GM change. So I think that would be a fantastic ad. There's certain arguments for like Harbaugh and Tomlin. Like Harbaugh is the staff builder. Tomlin has had some struggles with the staff, but brings his own defensive strengths himself, where he doesn't necessarily even need the strong staff. He's always going to have a good defense. Tomlin has that really good experience working with ownership, but Harbaugh brings a really strong front office that's seen consistent success. Not that the Steelers hasn't, just the Ravens has kind of been the model for it. So both great options. Tomlin's a little younger. I do think I'd lean Tomlin out of the two, but I would love either.
I think it's an important point you brought up, that with the dynamic of these families, until and unless the Maras are no longer owners of the Giants, which is the pod episode for another day with my theory on that. But the success the Giants have found over the years with these guys as owners is largely based on their view of what a head coach is. They do value a strong head coach. They don't value a domineering general manager quite as much. I think they like to meddle, and they're not going to stop meddling. And so the question is, do you keep fighting the trend, right, of them meddling and saying, I have to get somebody who can stop them from meddling, which is a tall task, or do you try to find a solution that works well with the reality of who they are? And we've had that prototype here. Tomlin is the prototype in Pittsburgh. Tom Coughlin was that prototype here for years. Bill Parcells was that prototype here for years. They were strong personality, culture building head coaches who essentially had a bubble around them, right? I am the coach. I run this team. Stay out of my business. You guys do whatever on the player personnel side. We'll work together on that. But I'm running this team. And they largely let these guys run their team, right? You never heard about interference when it came to those guys until it was like the end for Coughlin. I do think you need a personality like that can handle this family. It's just the reality of dealing with this family. So if you bring, that's one of the risks of bringing on a coordinator, right? When you hire like a hotshot coordinator who by all rights might be a great coach, he's immediately going to find himself under the thumb of these guys, and that's a risk. That is absolutely a risk.
Or even an example, I think a guy that we could have brought up is like a Mike McCarthy. It's not a sexy hire, but I think that's a risk with him because that'd be a guy on his third chance. And despite, winning the Super Bowl and being coaching a long time in this league, I think he'd find himself in a chance where it's like, you're basically under these guys' thumb because they kind of gave you your shot to get back in the league, because not many people are going to at this point.
Absolutely. All right. Let's go to the retread category, Monty, because now it starts. I think those two are obvious. I think most we can argue, but those are very safe, solid choices if you can get your hands on either one of those guys.
And those could be total waste of conversation. We could have just wasted 20 minutes there and neither could come available. We'll see.
Right. All right. I think for us, those would be ideal kind of candidates. But in any case, let's go to the retreads. And these are guys who will be available if you want to hire them. So we both picked one. I think we try to pick guys who are provocative names. Let's put it that way for a discussion. So why don't you start with your guy?
Yeah. So just kind of give you an intro. Retread gives you some interest to what, we liked with the proven head coach. This is a guy who isn't a total, you don't totally not know what you're getting with them. You've seen some of what they've done as a head coach, and you hope that they took from that first experience and learned from it. So, when picking these guys, we kind of got to think of like, hey, what makes you think that this guy could do better this time around? So let's get into it. Sal and I both had our choice. My first choice is going to be, highly divisive because a lot of people think this might not happen, and I'm not saying it will. I very much agree with those people, but I went with Brian Flores, Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator, who was a favorite to land the New York Giants head coaching job back in 2022. It really seemed like it was between Brian Daboll and Brian Flores. You saw texts of Tim McDonald advocating and saying that was the guy he wanted and hoping he wins the job. The issue is the reason we've seen those texts is because those texts showed up in the form of a lawsuit from Brian Flores against New York Giants in the NFL. Can Brian Flores look past that? Can the New York Giants look past that? I sure as hell don't think it's happening if Joe Shane's here. I'll tell you that. But is there a world where, the New York Giants want to put this whole thing to bed and, bring in a guy that they liked in the first place and, give this whole story a happy ending? Maybe not, probably not, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So here it is. Brian Flores, he was the Miami Dolphins head coach from 2019 to 2021 with a 24-25 record. So just under 500. He just missed the playoffs a couple years. This is a guy who overperformed every single year he was in Miami. His team from the first year where his owner was actively trying to pay him to throw games, won more games than anybody expected them to, was just missed playoffs and overperformed with the likes of Ryan Fitzpatrick and then with Tua as a rookie. This is a guy who really did have a lot of success despite all that, but it ended poorly. This is a guy who there's a lot of bad stories that came out where he did not handle players well, especially his young quarterback Tua, where really said some nasty things that put a lot of people off. And really, I think a lot of people, because of that, would never want to give this guy a second chance, especially with the young quarterback. And I do think that's a totally fair opinion to have. But, to me, I see one of the best defensive coordinators in football, a guy who had a lot of success as a head coach, and his defenses as a head coach and as a defensive coordinator continued to be one of the best in the NFL. And, you'd make a strength into a strength. And we'll get onto that when we talk more defensive coordinators. But I think the way that this Giants team can get back to playing an elite level is by having an elite level defense, and having an elite defensive mind running that would be a hell of a start. He'd be a culture builder, I think, with as far as a physical team in that sense. Now, the reason I think he might be better this time around, I think it was a godsend personally for Brian Flores' career that he didn't get the job with the Giants in 2022. I think if he got the job in 2022, I think you would have saw a lot of the same stuff. I think he would have been given up his last head coaching opportunity, and he would have never got another chance again. I think going to work underneath Mike Tomlin, who we just raved about how good of a coach he is, about how good he is handling head cases, how good he is, setting a culture. I think that set a good role model for him outside of just this Belichick tree, where I think you see a lot of things like you saw from Tomlin often from these guys. I think going and working under KOC, who is probably one of like the best player-friendly coaches in the league. And a big problem of Mike Tomlin Brian Flores was that he couldn't find an offensive coordinator. And know what he did? He just put him directly into the Shanahan tree, where he can pick from that tree and find some of the best offensive minds in football. Where previously he was trying to pick guys that he had familiarity with, as most coaches do. And they just really didn't exist in New England tree. Really an only defensive tree. So that helps them. Again, there's a lot of things that go against this. The lawsuit, what happened before. But I think that this is a guy, whether it's here or somewhere else, really deserves another chance. And I think will be successful next time around. I truly do believe that. And I would love for us to be that team. We'll see if that happens. But it's a guy, we saw this blitz heavy defense, like with all this, under Wink Martindale, and that really had a lot of success for us. I think he has a lot of disguises that really messes with young quarterbacks. I really like his scheme. I think it'd be interesting. I like the idea of bringing in Flores, but it is an interesting discussion. What's your thoughts on that, Sal?
I'm very wary of Brian Flores, not because I don't think he's a great coach. He's obviously a great coach. He's a great defensive coach, certainly. Probably one of the best in the game. The recent ruling by, I think it was a circuit court judge, that ruled that the NFL cannot take the Brian Flores lawsuit through its typical sealed arbitration process, and that the discovery and evidence in that, which include, what have until now been confidential emails in the NFL, are subject to public disclosure in an open trial. So I think that matters. It's good for Brian Flores' case. It's good, I think, for transparency for the NFL to his cause. It is bad for his prospects as becoming head coach of the Giants, because if there is any truth to what he's alleging, there's going to be a lot of dirty laundry aired. And I just don't know if the Giants are going to be the team that hires him. So I think it's a fairly impractical thing. I think he's great on paper, and I think he makes a lot of sense. He's a Brooklyn guy, and I think he would have been, I think he would have been a good coach at one point. But I think this lawsuit is just, it's hard to talk about him without discussing that, right? Like, it's just, it's so unrealistic. I don't think it's going to happen. So I don't see it, unless the only situation in which I see him potentially becoming the Giants head coach is if they're completely bought out by somebody else. A new ownership group would come in and they'd say, well, we don't care about what happened to the previous owners. We'd like to bring in a Brooklyn guy,
10% down.
We'll get to that episode. I can't believe I'm thinking about that. But anyway, I don't see it. Now, as the quality of a coach, he's fantastic. Like you mentioned, he is from the Belichick tree, which I despise completely. But he's learned from some great coaches, and he's also learned under the, and now essentially the McVay tree, and Mike Tomlin. I mean, he's coached under some great guys, Mike Tomlin, KOC, Bill Belichick. He's been a head coach, a successful one. I don't think you could do a lot better than him. Like, just take the lawsuit stuff out of it. Just the quality of the candidate, you could do a lot worse than Brian Flores. I don't know if you can do a lot better than Brian Flores in this retread category. I just don't think it's likely at all.
Yeah. All right.
Speaking of unlikely,
go with your guy.
My retreads are unlikely. So I brought this when I said provocative. I'm going to bring up a name that's going to make a lot of people upset here. A guy I personally like, and actually shout out to Rob, because he brought up his name a week ago, and I said I don't think it's practical that he gets a job right away. But I started thinking about it. I'm like, you know what? It's worth discussing. So my retread head coach possibility is Robert Saleh, the current defensive coordinator for the 49ers. You guys all remember that Rob Saleh was the Jets head coach from 2021 through part of 2024. He got fired after 5 games. He had a 20-36 overall record, no playoffs, fired with a 2-3 record last year. His accolades: he was a Super Bowl champion as a Seahawks assistant. He was nominated for AP Coach of the Year in 2022. He had a top 5 defense and takeaways in 2022 with the Jets. His scheme is a physical cover 3 variant of the Legion of Boom defense. He got his break under that as a defensive assistant. Actually, not his that was one of his early breaks with the Seahawks teams that won a Super Bowl. I'll get to that in a second. His offense was largely power rushing, play action. His coaching tree is really interesting. So he coached under Pete Carroll, Gary Kubiak with the Texans, Kyle Shanahan with the Niners. He coached under Dom Capers. He coached under his first defensive coordinator when he was an assistant with the Houston Texans, his first NFL job. You know who his DC was? Vic Fangio.
Interesting.
So this is a guy who trained under Vic Fangio. What's his name? Why am I forgetting his name? The Commanders head coach.
Dan Quinn.
Dan Quinn, right. Coach under Dan Quinn, Vic Fangio, Pete Carroll, Kyle Shanahan, Gary Kubiak. He's worked with some good people, right? And I think one thing you can say about Rob Saleh is his defenses are extraordinarily well coached and they're a force. Wasn't necessarily viewed as a great head coach with the Jets. I think he was very young, and I think he struggled to handle the position in New York. I do think he got saddled with a bad quarterback with Zach Wilson early on. And then when they moved off of Wilson, they brought in, the universe destroyer in Rodgers, who promptly, when they were set to have a good season, tears his Achilles on whatever it was, the fourth play of 2023. They have a terrible season. And then he comes in, they're 2-3 in the next season, and he basically gets him fired. At least that's the theory, that he got him fired. Did he get a fair shake? He got a less fair shake than Brian Dable's gotten. But I mean, you could argue that this is one of those guys, Monty, and this is the gamble with a guy like Saleh, right? He doesn't have a great coaching record as a head coach. He's a great defensive coach. He's very young. Is this like is he in the mold of like just all the guys who are going to fail? Or is this a talented coach, a young coach who got his first gig with a bad organization, with bad outcomes, like a Bill Belichick, right? Or like a Belichick did, right? Remember, people forget Bill Belichick started with the Browns. He was awful there, before he came back and worked for Tuna on the Jets. And then he went off to the Patriots. He was Jets head coach for one day, right? Famously. Is he one of those, right? Is he a guy that he's so talented as a coach, he just went to a bad place, had a bad opening gig, goes back to his roots as a coordinator, learns his lesson, and then he might be a great coach? I think there is some potential. There are not a lot of guys who I think of like that in that category. Saleh is one of them that comes to mind. That's what I think of as a retread, by the way. Right? Yeah. I think that, like, did he learn his job? Like, did he learn from the mistakes he made? He clearly, I'm not going to defend his record as Jets head coach. He was not a good head coach, right? He was soft. He let his players get away with too much. I think he wasn't quite ready for the moment, I would say. But did he learn his lesson? Because if he did, this is a talented coach who's still young, who has trained under some of the finest coaching minds in the NFL. So I think he's a worthy discussion. What are your thoughts on Saleh?
Yeah, I mean, a lot about Saleh makes me nervous, obviously. We've seen, the Jets are us, but amplified as far as the meddling from the owners. It's even worse over there. And, he got run over. They ran over him there. And unlike some of the guys we talked before, not only is he proven to, if he can handle it, he's proven he can't handle these meddling owners. Hasn't in the past, which worries me. Does he learn from that?
That's fair.
Can he handle it better this time around and put himself in a position where that can't happen? Maybe he did learn that. I think I would like to see him take a longer break from head coaching. Ideally, I'd like to take, he's a 1 year here in San Francisco. I do think this is a guy who should get another chance. I think it should come a little bit longer, but it's an interesting thought. I think that there's a lot of these defensive minds and offensive minds who get this head coach job and it kind of disappears. They're too caught up with the position and they can't coach. They can't be the coordinator they were when they was coordinator. I'll say Saleh is not that. Saleh is a guy who has an elite defense, no matter he's the head coach or a defensive coordinator. And if you bring in Saleh, you're going to have an elite defense. You can feel confident that is the one thing that will happen. He could be a disaster everywhere else, but you will have an elite defense. And the Jets were immediately a disaster defensively after firing Saleh. They are a disaster defensively, even with Aaron Glenn, who was a defensive coordinator for one of the best defenses in the NFL last year.
With the same personnel.
It is the Robert Saleh difference. And I think this is an underrated point, is Robert Saleh, as I kind of mentioned with Flores, he comes with that Shanahan tree. This is a guy who, hey, I know every Giants fan out there is saying, hire Mike McDaniels. I hate to break it to you, Giants fans, but he is like, these Shanahan guys stick together. He is sticking in the Shanahan tree. I can almost guarantee you. I am very confident he probably ends up the offensive coordinator of the Houston Texans. I'll tell you, the guy who could steal him, though, is one of his best friends, is Robert Saleh. Right. Robert Saleh and Mike McDaniels I believe they're in each other's weddings. These guys are best friends. And I think that is a guy who could get Mike McDaniels, and all of a sudden you have a killer staff there. So
it's a gamble.
It's a gamble. It's a case to be made for it, though.
But retreads are gambles by definition. Retreads are gambles. Like, people want to pretend Brian Flores is not a gamble. He's a huge gamble. The guy was a mess over there. Like, I'm sorry, he had a good record, but he was a problem with a young quarterback. That's like, if your head coach hates the living guts out of your franchise young quarterback, that's a problem. That's a problem that is not something you can just gloss over and say, he's fine. No, that's an issue. And I don't know that he is rehabilitated from that, right? I have no idea, but I think he's a good enough coach where he should get a shot, right? And so all I'm saying is that some of these guys, you're going to gamble. And the question is, do the positives of what you get with them, their individual talent and the people they bring with them, is that worth the risk? And I don't know if the answer is yes for Rob Saleh or not, but I do know, as you said, that he would come with a Shanahan coaching staff. And that is something I think you and I would sign up for in a second.
And I have something to tell you. We're about to talk about these coordinators. They're just as big of gambles, guys. Just as big, if not bigger gambles. It is just that the fact that we've seen this before. So it's easier to look at this and being like, nope, no thank you, because you've seen the downside. But the reality is, these coordinators, most of them are not going to get another shot. The fact most of them
are going to fail,
and they're not going to get a second shot. And the fact that we're talking about these guys getting a second shot, meaning they're somewhere in between there, between the total failures and the guys who were total successes. They're in between there, and they could end up being the total failure, or they could end up being the total success. That's why they're in this category.
Yeah, it's a very imperfect category, but we're looking at just the talent of the coach, guy with some experience, and I think these are interesting names. Like I said from the beginning, these are provocative names. I think some of this is more just thought exercise, right? Like, we're going through examples, but this is what retreads should look like. They are guys who they're retreads for a reason, because they had an unsuccessful experience in some way, shape, or form before. And they're going to try to rehabilitate with more experience under their belt, and you're gambling on the second shot around being a better one, right? That's kind of what you're hoping for, or the third shot, whatever it may be. But those are our retread options. These are so we had 4 guys who have been head coaches. Let's get into the coordinators, because I think this is where it kind of gets this is where people are all excited about, like, the prospects of guys who don't have a record.
It's like NFL draft prospects. It's like you have no idea what they could be, so it's all the more exciting. That's the great thing about the draft, and it's a great thing about these coordinators.
Exactly. All right, so why don't you start with your offensive coordinator candidate?
Sure. So we don't need to go too much intro in here as far as the prototype. You know what it is. The offensive coordinators, guys who really don't have that head coach experience for the most part, or at least haven't in a long time. Forgot about that. But my guy is Mike Lafleur, Los Angeles Rams offensive coordinator. Yes, the brother of Matt Lafleur. He's been the offensive coordinator for the LA Rams since 2023. Before that, he was the offensive coordinator for the New York Jets under Robert Saleh. And yeah, he had his struggles there. I think a lot of that was a quarterback situation. I think they totally botched the Zach Wilson pick, and he got tied to that. But before that, he was the passing game coordinator for years underneath Kyle Shanahan. actually kind of a messed up story. Before they got rid of the rule that assistants couldn't be blocked from coordinator positions, his brother, Matt Lafleur, tried hiring him to be his offensive coordinator in Green Bay, and Shanahan blocked it. The work of his own brother under a promotion, and he got stuck. And then they changed that rule after that, and then he ended up taking the job at Robert Saleh and the Jets. Probably wishes he got the job with his brother, but all kind of worked out in the end because he ended up working underneath one of the best minds in football, one of the best coaches in football, and Sean McVay. And you can almost look at this as like a rehabilitation thing in its own, because he went to the Rams. He's worked underneath Kyle Shanahan for years, and now he gets to work underneath Sean McVay for years. And it's a great offense over there in Rams. It's hard to tell because Sean McVay is the play caller, so it's always more difficult with guys like this. But that's a great scheme. They have it's a very heavy zone running West Coast offense, a lot of play action, misdirection. I think it would improve our running game a lot. I think it would be a really good fit, personally, in my opinion, for Jackson Dart. When we talked about him going into it, we saw Jackson Dart as somebody who could be a really good fit for a West Coast offense. He could use those legs, but I think ideally as a passer, it would be a really good fit for him. He is, like I said, Shanahan. He was in Shanahan in Cleveland, Atlanta, San Francisco. He was with Pete Carroll, Sean McVay. He was with his brother. This is a guy who's been around, and I think that this would certainly be an interesting pick for us. Certainly somebody worth an interview. That's the least I could say, is if you have that much experience with two of the best offensive minds in football, I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to see if you could be the next guy. I mean, his brother is wildly successful in his own right. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on Mike LaFleur?
I mean, he's a name.
Yeah.
He's a name. I think he's a good coach. I think, like, it's just so hard because you have the stench of everything, just like Saleh did on the Jets that whole period, right? Like that, it's hard to shake that off. But at the end of the day, this is a guy who has trained under the best. He's trained under McVay. He's trained under Shanahan. His brother's a great coach. He had one bad experience, which, admittedly, he holds responsibility for that. His offenses with the Rams have been pretty good, pretty solid. Now, he's had Matt Stafford, so that helps. And he's had Sean McVay, that helps, but he has been the offensive coordinator the last 3 years there. I don't think he's a bad choice. I need to see a little more. I think there are other names that I'm a little bit more excited by. But listen, again, the argument here is if you're bringing the McVay tree with you, you're bringing staff with you, and it's a guy to give a shot to, you could do worse than a LaFleur. And I think that's the reality. It's going to piss people off if he's hired. I cannot see him getting hired, I'll be honest, by the Giants. But if he were somehow the one that got hired, a lot of people are going to get upset. But what you would get, the pros in this are, you are going to get the benefit of the McVay tree. He's going to come with guys that McVay, Shanahan, that tree of guys, and you'll see a different approach to how things are done. And I'm okay with that. Not the candidate highest on my list, but I can understand the appeal.
I understand not being a favorite, but being upset with getting a guy from that tree that's been so wildly successful would be odd to me. We don't know enough about him to really hate it or love it. That's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, I look at his brother. His brother wasn't a play caller, went to Tennessee for 1 year, did not have a very successful offense, got hired as a head coach, and has been wildly successful in Green Bay. So I think I think his opportunity, whether here or somewhere else, is coming.
Absolutely. With that, let's go into my guy. My offensive coordinator prototype is cut from the same cloth, but I think a more interesting name. To be fair, we split these up. So, I think you can tell we have a slant here, and I don't care. It's our podcast. Our slant is our slant. But my option here is Klint Kubiak. who is the current offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. It's his first year as offensive coordinator there. He has no head coaching experience or prior offensive coordinator experience, but this guy was raised in the fire of the West Coast offense, Monty. This is the son of famed coach Gary Kubiak, two-time Super Bowl champion, the offensive coordinator under Mike Shanahan years prior. Back when Mike Shanahan developed the newer variation, the father of the current variation of the Bill Walsh style offense. It is essentially a balanced physical attack run game, a lot of zone runs, play action, West Coast style zone blocking. Again, Gary Kubiak's son. He has trained under Pete Carroll, Dan Quinn. He has the Shanahan training. You're seeing now. This is probably unlikely because he's a first-year offense coordinator. He's young. Look at what they're doing in Seattle.
OC.
His first year. I'm sorry, with the Seahawks.
Yes, yeah.
First year with the Seahawks as their OC, but you're seeing that Seahawk offense and how it is performing. You see how they're making use of their talent. You have guys like JSN, who's we love JSN coming out of the draft, but he struggled with Shane Waldron as his OC. Yeah. You see him with Kubiak. I mean, he's taking off, right? He's becoming one of the better receivers in the game. You see him utilizing the strengths of Sam Darnold. Everybody said last year, when he had that 14-win season, looked great under Kevin O'Connell. Could Sam Darnold replicate it? He's doing it again, and maybe it's just all credit to Sam Darnold. It took him time and he got to his own, but man, he's in a good system. It seems very quarterback friendly. He's taking advantage of his tight ends. He's taking advantage of his stable of running backs. They have a good balanced offense. That Seahawk team looks like a contender for the NFC title this year. And it's in no small part because of that offense. So that's an exciting name, dude. I mean, if you're looking for an offensive coordinator who can coach up and maximize what you're getting out of a young quarterback. And you remember my comp for Jackson Dart when he came out?
Who was it again?
Sam Darnold. There you go. There are shades of Sam Darnold's game, like some of the immaturity, but a lot, some of the moxie that he had, at USC, like some of that fearlessness. Now he has a better arm, I think, a slightly better arm than Dart, not by much, but a little bit better. And he's obviously now a veteran, but there are elements of his game that I think using the middle of the field, a little bit of mobility. Darnold has that. He's not a great runner, but he has a little bit of mobility. I think that a coach like Kubiak could absolutely unlock Dart's potential, and that's what's exciting to me about him. So, what are your thoughts on him?
Klint Kubiak's really interesting, man. I've been following Klint Kubiak for a long time because I'm a big fan of his father. I think he's kind of the forgotten man in that Shanahan tree. He's the original of the Mike Shanahan guys. He was the first one to break loose and kind of prove that system works outside of Mike. And then years later, his son figured it out, and McVay and whatnot, and we're off and running. But Gary in Houston for a long time, successful offenses, took that over to Denver and, won a Super Bowl and had historic passing yard season record, passing touchdown season record with Peyton Manning. Really showed what that offense was made of. And Klint, he's been waiting for his time to really take that step. He's had a lot of unsuccessful opportunities so far. I mean, in Minnesota, they kicked him out after 1 year. He was out after 1 year in Denver as a passing game coordinator. So he got the chance with the Saints. And, some of these are opportunities of coaching staff changes. But, Saints, he was off hot to start the beginning of last year. And that's what you got to keep an eye on this year is will that happen again? Because they ended up one of the worst offenses in the NFL after a hot start. Can Seattle keep it going this year? We will see. But if they do, it's certainly going to make him one of the hottest candidates in the NFL, given given who his father is, given the tree he comes from, and what he was able to do with that Seattle offense this year without, an elite quarterback, good quarterback, but not an elite one in Sam Darnold. I think that would make him a very hot candidate. And, I would love a piece of that offense. I think if he's finally ready, I would absolutely take a shot on him. I'm bringing him for an interview regardless.
Through 5 games, the Seahawks are number 5 in the NFL in offensive points scored. In passing yards, they are number 5. In rushing yards, they are a little lower. They're 17. But it's a balanced attack. It's mostly passing under Darnold right now, but overall, they're putting up a lot of points, man. They're winning games with their offense. They have a very good defense, and that's why I said I think they're slowly becoming the favorites in my mind to potentially win the NFC. They look really like a good team, but that offense is a big part of it. Kubiak is going to be a name that gets traction. He's got, if they keep playing at this level, he's going to get traction, and he's an interesting candidate because one of the priorities for the Giants, and we haven't talked about this too much, though, when they're looking for a head coach, is if you don't go for one of these experienced guys, you want to get somebody who is going to do what is the most important thing for your organization's success, which is get your quarterback to a high level. It's by far the single most important thing. And you're going to be looking for guys who can do that one way or another. Kubiak probably is a guy I would trust in that role. There's somebody else who I would trust in that role who we'll bring up later. But I think he's an interesting candidate for that reason.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, if you hired Klint, I would guess that Gary Kubiak would come to be on that staff and be an advisor in some way to help him, which would be a big add for Klint.
Absolutely. All right. Let's go to the defensive coordinator prototype. So interesting. I think these are interesting characters. We chose a young one and an old one, and I think everybody's going to like both these names for different reasons. So why don't you go with your guy first?
Sure. So this one, I think, I'm sure there's been a lot of mixed feelings about the guys we've mentioned so far. I think this is probably be the most unanimous excitement based off what I've seen on Giants Twitter. And that's going to be Jesse Minter, Los Angeles Chargers defensive coordinator last year and this year. Before that, he was defensive coordinator at Michigan, national champion defensive coordinator. He has not been a head coach before, but this is a guy who has kind of helped usher in with the likes of Mike McDonald, that new wave of defense. There's just really kind of taken over the NFL. It kind of grew from that Rex Ryan, grew from that Wink Martindale, and has taken this next step to this very multiple front, creative sub package look. Was really, really efficient defense. This guy so far he's worked under Jim Harbaugh, he's worked under Carlay, he's worked under Brian Kelly, son of Rick Minter, but really, really interesting candidate. I think this is the defense that you want to look to add. You see what the Ravens did, you see what Michigan did, you see what Seattle's doing this year. I think that Jesse Minter is the young next step, has worked under a great coach in Jim Harbaugh, hopefully learned a lot from him. I think that if he can put together a good staff and, bring in a good, experienced guy to kind of help him, especially on the offensive side of the ball, I think this could be a really good hire, and a really good hire for the New York Giants, because, I talked about it with Flores. I'll talk about it here with these guys. Is defensive identity is how the New York Giants are going to be a successful football team. That's just how this team is built. We have all our talent on the defensive side of the ball. We need to be an elite defense that absolutely suffocates offenses, and then, continue to get this offense better and better, but win with our defense. That's how we're going to win football games. So I would be very excited to add Jesse Minter as our head coach.
Yeah, Jesse Minter is the hottest name out there in coordinators. And when you mentioned everything about his scheme, is the new age variation of essentially the Buddy Ryan, Rex Ryan defense. It's evolved into different schematic defensive secondary looks, really, as opposed to just the fronts. It's now confused the quarterback with different post-snap reads in the secondary and in the second level with the linebackers, less blitzing, some blitzing, but less, but it's a variation of the same thing. Fool the quarterback, right? Fool the quarterback. And he's one of the best at it. That team, that Michigan team that won the national title, I mean, he coached some stars, right? I mean, he coached some great players on those teams even before the team that won the national title. He coached David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson. He coached Mike Sainristil, and he coached Will Johnson. He coached guys who are going to come out now like Rod Moore. He coached Junior Colston. Like there were NFL players that he coached up, and they are good. They're either good pros or on their way to being good pros. Some of them are all pros. This is a good coach. Young, good, comes from a great tree. I have no problem with Jesse Minter. I'd love to have him. I think the issue with Jesse Minter is going to be you're not getting Jesse Minter if Joe Schoen is GM. I think this flat out, he has to come with his general manager. And I think that's going to be an issue. And is that the right dynamic for the Giants? I'm not sure. I think he's a great coach. I don't know how he'll be as a head coach, but I think to get him, you have to have a complete overhaul.
But for us, that's the great thing about him is because also we mentioned it, and we'll get into it when we get to the defensive court or when we get to the GM part of this conversation. But he's going to bring that Baltimore tree. You look at a guy like, I don't think we're talking about him in the episode, but like Chad Alexander, who is the assistant GM over there, and he came from that Baltimore tree. It very much could be a guy for the job. There's other guys, but that would be a really interesting thing for bringing in Jesse Minter. No, I forgot to mention it. I said Jim Harbaugh, also John Harbaugh. He started underneath John Harbaugh. He was an assistant, at least NFL-wise. He started underneath John Harbaugh as a defensive assistant there. Really, pretty good tree for what he's worked under. And I'll say this is the last thing I'll say about it. If Jesse Minter was an offensive head coach, Jesse Minter would already have a job. Jesse Minter would have been the hottest candidate last year, maybe only behind Ben Johnson. Maybe only behind Ben Johnson. But he's a defensive guy. And the league is obsessed with offensive head coaches, and rightfully so. This is an offensive league. But it gives you the opportunity to get a guy like this time around and have an extra year of experience in the NFL before getting the job. And you might be able to get the next big thing in football because of that.
If I had to guess, I would today guess that Jesse Minter at this time next year is head coach of the Baltimore Ravens.
I think so too. I think Harbaugh shakes loose and they go Minter, and I think that's a good idea for them.
Yeah, I think John Harbaugh and the Ravens are going to go their separate ways after this season, one way or another, and I think Minter is likely going to be the guy they tap to go to Baltimore. But if he's out there, he should be high on the Giants search list for sure, and he will interview with the Giants. Like I have zero doubt about that. Like I think he would want that interview.
And right. I'll say I said my last thing, but I'll say one more thing because Alex mentioned it in the chat. Yeah, the Chargers, especially that first year, did not have a lot of talent. That's all people talked about their offseason was how little talent they had on that Chargers defense. And Jesse Minter did a lot of great work with that team. And I think he's still hiding their lack of talent on that team, and he's maximizing players that in other places wouldn't look this good.
So I'll give you my guy. And this one's going to be, you guys are going to love it and you're going to hate it. Okay. But my defensive coordinator to at least consider for a head coaching job for the Giants, and this could have been a retread candidate, but I put him under DC because that's what he's been for a while now, is no other than famous Giant Steve Spagnuolo. The current Kansas City Chiefs defensive coordinator had a lousy head coaching record, 11-41 in the regular season. It was a disaster. But 4-time Super Bowl champion as defensive coordinator, 1 with the Giants, 3 with the Chiefs. He was the architect of the Giants upset over the undefeated Patriots, that famous Super Bowl 42 game you guys all remember. His coaching tree is impressive. He got his start under Andy Reid with the Eagles. He's now with Andy Reid again on the Chiefs. Obviously, he coached under Tom Coughlin here. He coached under Sean Payton with the Saints for a year, and he coached under John Harbaugh with the Ravens for a couple of years as an assistant. He has been well trained as a coach. He's arguably a Hall of Fame coordinator as a defensive coordinator. We all know his scheme. He's basically mostly a 4-3 base with a lot of disguised blitz packages, and he brings pressure, and he's an aggressive coach. He's not going to let the game come to him. He's like the opposite of what we see now with Shane Bowen. This is a guy who's going to bring it to the quarterback, and he's going to dictate terms defensively. Remains to be seen what he would be like again as a head coach. His 2 head coaching stints were disastrous when he got his own job, and then when he took over when the Giants fired Ben McAdoo for just a few games. But if the Giants, again, if they decide to go with someone they're familiar with, that they feel comfortable with, who has a lot of experience, and at minimum, he's bringing a big-time defensive approach to the game, you could do a lot worse than a guy like Steve Spagnuolo. So what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, man. I mean, my biggest worry would just be like, if they get a guy like Steve Spagnuolo, I just can't be confident that they did their due diligence in their head coach search because they're going familiarity. And that's would probably be my biggest issue about it, that and the age of him. But I'm always going to root for Steve Spagnuolo. I love Steve Spagnuolo. I root for the Chiefs in most of these Super Bowls because of Steve Spagnuolo. And I hope he gets another chance as a head coach. And if it's here, then I'll root for him all the way, and hope he's extremely successful. But he's an older guy. I would personally want to take a shot more of a younger or proven guy. Getting an older, unproven guy makes me a little bit, at least as a head coach, makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I would not really be totally happy with a hire, as much as I love Spags as an offense as our head coach, but I have to mention it because let's face it, it's on the radar. If you don't think the Giants are thinking about, should Steve be part of this search, you're fooling yourself. I could have put another name here, but Monty said that he would stop doing our pod if I put that name. But I'm going to mention him anyway, just as a throwaway, and that's Lou Anarumo. He's going to be on the list, Monty, whether you like it or not.
He'll be on the list if Joe Schoen is retained.
Yeah. All right. I'll just put it out there. All right, let's go. So that's our, NFL guys. We have a couple of college guys that I think are worth discussing. And I think this is where it gets interesting. And I know we're going long here with the coaches because we have to get through GMs also, but this is fun. And I hope you guys can be patient with us with this episode. So why don't you give us your college coach and we'll go from there.
Okay. Real quick, I'll say, just throw another name out there. I might go to Jeff Haffley, I think, is another interesting name at the defensive coordinator position, local guy. We'll go into that another time, but I just want to throw it out there. All right. But yeah, I'm going to preface a little bit here with the college head coach. I will say the college head coach makes me nervous. I don't know how you feel about it, but it is a transition that has failed many times going to the NFL. There was obviously the guys who have had success, usually started in the NFL and then went to the college game. But we're going to talk about it anyway, because you can't not talk about it. And they're going to be mentioned every single year. So the guy I brought up is no other than Marcus Freeman, the coach for Notre Dame.
Shout out 1T.
Shout out 1T. Really kind of the hot candidate here for being mentioned as a potential guy to make the leap to the NFL. He started out as head coach in 2022. 2021, he was an interim for a bowl game, but really started out in 2022 as a head coach for Notre Dame. Went 9-4, won the Gator Bowl, 10-3, Sun Bowl win, and then 14-2, and took him to a college football runner-up and national champion runner-up. So, national coach of the year. This is, the young, hot college coach right now. This is a guy who runs a nickel-based 4-2-5 as most of college does. He is top nationally in pass efficiency and sacks in 2023. Really successful defense there. Former defensive coordinator under Brian Kelly and Luke Fickell. So that's his tree as far as college goes. To me, I don't know how that translation will work to the NFL. It's a guy who briefly played in the NFL So I think that helps a little bit with understanding the locker rooms, especially since it was as recently as 2009. That's something I look for. But I think his personality works. I think that's the biggest thing for me. I think, this is a guy who brings like an elite culture building ability with him and player development. I think this guy, to me, if I was going to make an NFL comparison, he reminds me a little bit of a D'Amico Ryans type. I think that's the type of coach he could be. The jump from college to NFL is extremely hard. It's almost like it's getting to the point that it's almost two completely different games. It really is. And that makes me nervous. But I do think that Marcus Freeman has the correct makeup to be an NFL coach. I think he could be a player's coach. And that's kind of my case for him. I think it's a guy I would certainly be interested in bringing in for an interview.
I think he's an excellent coach. He's very young. And I think his lack of experience and age and not having really any NFL experience would give me a tremendous amount of pause, for this position. I mean, what he has going for him is he's already gone to a national title game, and he's coached at the highest level of the college ranks at Notre Dame. And being a Notre Dame guy, he's on the radar of the Giants. Like, the Giants have deep ties to Notre Dame.
Yep.
And I think there's no way they're not thinking about him. My guess is they're looking at him and saying, we'd love to have this guy as our head coach in 15 years, or something like that. I feel like they're looking at him as a possible guy for the future, either him or some intern at BC right now, but I think he's very young. I think he's intriguing. I'm not sure I feel comfortable with it, but I think if you go down the college coaching rank, he is one of those executive head coach types, right? Like the leader types, not just a coordinator, but actual like program builder. And I respect it. I think that's sort of where I would lean here.
All right. So
let's go to my, So I'm going to go. So before I go into my guy, I'll say that I know who people want to hear about because it's circulating on Giants Twitter. We are not bringing that guy up other than to say, I respect Lane Kiffin's aura. He is the Jackson Dart of head coaches. I respect it.
He'll be in every New York-based influencer's DMs within a week if he gets the job.
Lane Kiffin's a trip, man. He's an entertaining character, and he would probably be fun to watch as an NFL head coach. I don't see it happening. I'll be honest. I can't see the Giants turning to Lane Kiffin to handle the organization.
It's hard to translate any college offense to the NFL. Seeing Lane Kiffin's offense translate.
Just seeing Lane Kiffin translate. He's a character, dude. Like putting him in the NFL stage again. And do you remember the college coach? Yeah, I mean the disaster with the Raiders. He was very young then, but still, like the whole shit with like Al Davis forcing him to try to resign, and the pissing contest with Davis. Like, I don't see it personally, but he's the intrigue. His name is going to get thrown around a lot.
At least we mentioned it.
So we're mentioning it. It's not the guy I'm choosing. I'll tell you who I did go over, and he's a name for college football junkies like us. And my guy that I'm mentioning here is an older coach, but a guy who does not have NFL experience either. But it's Curt Cignetti, the head coach at Indiana. Currently, Indiana. I'm sorry.
Shouldn't be the coach at Indiana. Should be the coach at West Virginia.
Mountaineer alum, by the way, who decided to go. Who would have coached at West Virginia? Who would have coached at West Virginia if they offered him the position? You know this, right?
But we kept Neil Brown.
But you kept Neil Brown. Neil Brown mentioned, somebody wanted in the chat. So there's your Neil Brown mention. Neil Brown is the reason that Curt Cignetti is not the West Virginia head coach. What Curt Cignetti is remarkable. Remarkable. Guy started Pittsburgh, then Davidson, quarterback coach at Rice, Temple, worked his way. We're going back to the 80s. He's the dude is 64 years old. Up the ranks to Pittsburgh, NC State as a quarterback tight end coach, run game coordinator. Then he gets to Alabama, 2007, 2010. He's their wide receivers coach.
To start a Saban staff. He was the first of Saban staff.
Right. Back when Saban was a young man, right? Essentially. Then like he bounces around for a while, lands at James Madison. James Madison is a small state school in Virginia. It's a not on the radar college football program, and he brings them to respectability out of nowhere. Like
Just
really,
got to FBS. Just
right.
got into FBS.
Because of this guy. Last year, he goes to Indiana, immediately turns them into a good team. Indiana, a basketball school, turns them into a good team. I mean, they had an 11-win season, dude. They got a playoff berth, right? And a top 5 ranking. I mean, remarkable. And that was with Curtis Rourke as their quarterback, right? Who was a statue who we reviewed last year.
This year, torn ACL.
Right. This year, I mean, undefeated Indiana team. I forget what their ranking is now, right? I think, what are they, like 5th? Huh?
I think 7th. I'll check.
They're up there. They're in the top 10. A couple of weeks ago, they play a top 11 ranked Illinois team and beat them 63-10 or something like some ridiculous beatdown. I mean, he has Fernando Mendoza playing out of his mind. You have to give him credit for that. This guy was a quarterback's coach before. Mendoza looks like he might be the best quarterback in this class. He's fighting it out with Dante Moore. Yep. They are national title contenders out of Indiana, out of nowhere, right? It's not like they have a bunch of 5-star recruits. Look at their roster. They're not filled with 5-star recruits at all, right? It's a bunch of 3-star guys and guys who are not even ranked by 24/7. Curt Cignetti is a program builder. He is a leader of kids and men. Phenomenal coach, culture builder, all of that, right? He's a dick. Like I comped him to, for those who remember, Bob Knight, the Indiana basketball coach, who was a great coach and a complete asshole. He threw a chair at the refs once in a game. That's Curt Cignetti. He's like the guy who's going to get in the face of every player and scream at them, and he's going to walk them down. I mean, he's an asshole, right? But he's a hard ass coach. He's a throwback. But this guy is a freaking coach. He is not for the faint of heart, but he's a winner. And I think you and I both believe that whatever happens in Indiana this year, like his probable next stop is Alabama, but if he decided to make the jump to the NFL, he doesn't have a lot of time. He's 64 years old. Some team might call Curt Cignetti. I don't know who it would be, but I have to imagine somebody's going to say, do you want to tackle an NFL team? And, so you have to put him on the radar as a coach to watch. What do you think about Cignetti?
You want to hear an interesting Cignetti connection to the Giants?
There's a connection to the Giants? I had no idea. Yeah.
There's a connection. His brother, Frank Cignetti, was the New York Giants quarterback coach from 2016 to 2017.
So he coached Eli Manning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There you go.
There's a connection. Yeah,
so
his brother was a quarterback coach all over the NFL. His father, former West Virginia coach. Again, fucked up.
I mean, you have Rich Rod though, so you're fine.
Great.
You're fine. What would you think about this? Like, if they went down the college coaching ranks, how do you feel about a guy like Cignetti for the Giants?
I hear the interest of Cignetti because he's a fantastic coach. I don't believe in these college coaches translating, especially I know I did it with mine too. Especially guys who don't really have the NFL experience. I think the guys who work are the guys who really kind of grind their teeth to start out in the NFL and then, go to college for an opportunity and then come back to the NFL.
The Pete Carrolls and the Jim Harbaughs and those guys. Yeah.
Correct. And that's not Cignetti. I couldn't really find many that was in. Like you could argue Kiffin, honestly. The argument for Kiffin you do is that he has the NFL experience. So that makes me nervous. But he's a great coach. I feel a lot better about it if he's a little younger. It's an interesting name. I would not be mad if he got put on our interview list.
What would scare me about him is his attitude. I think it's great for 3-star and lower recruits in college because he can absolutely intimidate them and whip them into shape and get them playing their ass off. I think it's an act that would run very thin with pro athletes making, a
Does
lot
that
of money.
even work at like Alabama if he ends up going there? I don't know.
Right. You're dealing with all these guys with NIL deals, right? Are they going to listen to you? I don't know. he might be just perfect for a program like Indiana for now, but it's just a name to watch. And I just thought, I'm going to give the dude his flowers. He's earned it. He's earned this type of discussion. He's a remarkable coach. I think pound for pound, he's probably the best coach in college football right now. It's hard to argue with that, with what he's producing. So that's our 2 college coaches. What are we doing on time? We're going nice and long here.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long way. We've been pretty good in time lately. We're gonna do a nice 2-hour.
You guys are gonna stay with us all the way through. We started on time today, so
yeah,
we got those extra few minutes in. All right, our wild card,
last head coach category.
Last head coach, and then we're gonna go through GMs, and I promise that'll be faster. I think there's less to go over with GMs.
We don't know enough about them. We're gonna try to give you an idea, but there's not.
We'll go through them quicker, but I think head coaches are fun to talk about scheme and fit and things like that in history. So your wild card head coach is?
My wild card one. I think we both have really interesting ones here. This one's probably a bigger wild card than yours, but is Jeff Stoutland, O-line coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, and run game coordinator. This is a guy who actually was an interim head coach for a game at Miami in 2010. Fun fact, but it has not been a head coach. Hasn't been a coordinator. He's just been an O-line coach and then a run game coordinator now. But it's consistently been I wouldn't just say the best O-line coach in football. I mean, one of the best coaches in football, period. End of statement. He is one of the best coaches in football, and a large reason the Philadelphia Eagles are so successful is Stoutland University consistently pumping out great offensive linemen. And to me, this reminds me a little bit of Dante Scarnecchia. The New England Patriots. He was the big reason the New England Patriots were so successful for so long. Obviously, Bill Belichick. Obviously, Tom Brady. But Dante Scarnecchia was there for that whole time and was consistently the best offensive lines in football. And I think the Eagles have a little bit of that with Stoutland. Stoutland, who started under Saban. Well, not started, but before he was last in college football under Saban. Then he went to the Eagles and was under Andy Reid. Then Chip Kelly, and then he was under Doug Peterson, and so on and so forth. And now we're here under Dick Face Sirianni. And I think that this is a guy who deserves to get a chance. You've seen other O-line coaches get a chance. You've seen, it hasn't worked out in the past. I'm a little up to that with this thing is like, I'm making this case, but what did a Mike Munchak do? I'm making this case, but what did a Bill Callahan do? Not wildly successful coaches. They weren't total failures, but they weren't, I wouldn't say that, but they weren't wildly successful by any means. But I think Jeff Stoutland is the best of the bunch. And I think he's had so much time under a lot of good coaches. He has so much respect around this league. He can command a room. I think this is a guy who you bring in and give a chance to have this opportunity because, there's teams who've wanted to hire him as an offensive coordinator. And he said no. He wanted to stay in Philadelphia and be their QB coach. But head coach is a whole different level of opportunity. And to give him a shot, I think is something I'd at least entertain. You'll have an elite offensive line, and what can he bring as an impressive coach to a higher level? Because he's a fantastic coach. I think it's my point with the Dante Scarnecchia thing is they tried all these New England all New England coaches. All these guys failed in other places. The fact that Dante Scarnecchia never got a chance, I think, is a huge failure by the league. I think that's the one guy who truly deserved a chance to be a head coach. And he never got one. And I think Stoutland is now the guy who's like that and deserves to get his chance.
What you love about Stoutland is he comes in, he stabilizes your O-line and run game pretty much right off the bat. Like you can just bank on that being done. And you probably do have to offer him offer him a head coaching position to get him to pry away from Philadelphia. But he's a Staten Island guy, and I think he would consider it, obviously. So again, it depends on what your philosophical approach is to the coach, right? Do you want to have a defensive guy, an executive, a guy with experience? But if you want to have a guy who has some roots in New York and who's your aim is, I'm going to get a guy who's going to focus on my trenches. We're going to play smash mouth football, control the line of scrimmage, and he's going to fix our O-line and our run game, and we're going to build outward from that. I think you could do a lot worse than a guy like Jeff Stoutland. I mean, that's not a bad
place to start.
Right. I mean, that's what do we talk about all the time, right? This is what we've been missing forever as Giants fans. It was our roots. And we haven't had it in a while. We're finally getting a good pass blocking O-line thanks to Carmen Brasillo. But clearly there has been a lack of emphasis on a dominant O-line outside of Andrew Thomas. We haven't had anybody who can be a dominant offensive lineman for years. And he's going to probably bring, expertise in getting the right personnel and coach them up to have a dominant O-line. I think that's fair to say. So,
and he's a beloved guy. His linemen love him.
Right. So if you're the type of fan, and I know there's a lot of you guys out there who say, screw everything else, guarantee me a dominant O-line, and we'll go from there, and let that coach then build a staff that can handle other parts of the game. But the freaking the dynamic, the identity of the team is, we dominate the trenches on the offensive side of the football. Jeff Stoutland's about as high as you're going to get on that list of candidates. And I think that's the argument for a guy like Stoutland. So I do like the way you're approaching that. And again, he's a Staten Island guy. I think there is something there to it. I don't know if they'd go down that road, but he's a fascinating guy. And
I'll say, I've said it before. You and I have both talked about this. If we get like an offensive head coach in here who's, not Stoutland, but I would go out and try to get Stoutland as an offensive coordinator, just to bring what he brings on the O-line, bring what he brings to the run game. And if I have a fallback of a head coach who has more of experience in that pass game area, I would happily make that move. And maybe he would do it because he's a Staten Island guy. I think I would take that shot, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yep, it's just an interesting name to bring up. All right. My guy, my wild card in this is a guy that I think I saw some people mention in the chat.
A good bit in the chat here. So
yeah, and he's definitely gonna be interesting. It's Josh McCown, the current quarterbacks coach for the Minnesota Vikings. So McCown was a former NFL quarterback, a third-round pick out of Sam Houston State, way back, I think in 2001, something like that. Bounced around the league for years as a backup, had a long career, almost 20-year career as a backup in the NFL. Finished with the Texans in 2020. The Texans organization thought really highly of him for his mind, and they interviewed him for an assistant head coaching job in the 2021 season. They also interviewed him for their head coaching job in January of 2022, famously the year that Brian Flores also interviewed for their job and for the Giants job. And by all accounts, the Texans were ready to hire McCown as their head coach in January 2022. And there was a lot of pushback, saying you didn't have a fair interview process. You were just handing him the job, that they were violating the Rooney Rule. If you remember, there was a lot of that stuff going on. They shied away from it. They walked away from it, and they ended up hiring Lovie Smith in that position for that year. And then famously Lovie Smith gets fired, and they end up with D'Amico Ryans, and things, worked out. But McCown was nevertheless viewed as a very attractive candidate. In 2023, he was on Frank Reich's staff with the Carolina Panthers, and they end up, if you guys remember the story, I don't know if you all remember it, but they had the number 1 overall pick. They traded up to number 1 overall with the Chicago Bears, and the story is that Reich and McCown had zeroed in on CJ Stroud as the quarterback they wanted. In fact, there are clips of McCown at the combine talking to CJ Stroud, saying, see you in Charlotte, Yeah. Like it sounds like they had decided CJ Stroud was their guy. And to me, he fits their prototype quite well. Mm-hmm. Then the reports come out that their owner, David Tepper, who is as meddling an owner as you can imagine, decides, I don't want CJ Stroud. I want Bryce Young. And there was a big fight, but ultimately the owner got what he wanted. They take Bryce Young. They have a disastrous start because, quite frankly, neither Reich nor McCown, in my opinion, And I think the opinion of many people in the NFL really wanted Bryce Young. They were geared up to get the guy they wanted in CJ Stroud. And you see how that's ended up so far, at least. Although Bryce is playing a little bit better. They start 1-10. Owner gets angry, blames them for the start. It fires everybody, right? Fires Reich, fires Stu Staley, the offensive coordinator, and McCown. They're out in November of 2023. And then who hires him almost immediately off the street a few months later as quarterbacks coach? Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah, I think they had a quarterbacks coach at the time. He's like, yeah, we can use another one.
Right. Kevin O'Connell's like, oh, he's available? I'll take him. I mean, that's how highly regarded he is as at least a quarterbacks coach. And so he's been in Minnesota the last couple of years. That's the background. They obviously zeroed in on JJ McCarthy in the draft. We'll see how that goes. He's been hurt a lot. He had one really bad game and one game where he started bad but had ended well. But that's all he's had in the NFL. But he's had a lot of injuries. But more famously, they resurrected Sam Darnold's career. I mean, they really did. 14 wins, got him a contract, got paid. Held. He's doing great. And it's held, McCown is a really good coach, at least for quarterbacks. And I think he's going to be a hot name on the offensive coordinator list. But this is why he's our wild card. He is 46 years old. He has been considered for head coaching jobs before. And quite frankly, you could try to get him as an offensive coordinator on a staff with another coach, but he ain't going to last long. He's one of these guys, right? He's one of these guys who you're going to hire him thinking you got your offensive coordinator. He's probably going to be gone as a head coach within a couple of years. At least that's the suspicion, right? If you want to lock him up, you might have to go directly from QB coach to head coach. But what you're getting, the philosophy with a guy like Josh McCown is a guy who has trained under an innovative mind in Kevin O'Connell, who is a quarterback. I hate to use the word guru, but he's a very good quarterback developing coach, and one of the more respected young minds in the game. And if you want to lock that up early, you just take the chance and say, forget the coordinator shit. You're going directly to be a head coach. So what are your thoughts about Josh McCown?
Hey, man, that's not an unheard of path. There's a man known by Andy Reid who once took that path once upon a time, who was the quarterback coach for Brett Favre in Green Bay. And the Philadelphia Eagles brought him in as, their wild card interview. They brought him in like, I like what this guy's done over there. Let's talk to him. He blew him away. And next thing you know, he was the next head coach for the Philadelphia Eagles and bringing them to a Super Bowl. Josh McCown's a guy you absolutely should interview. Absolutely have to interview, in my opinion. He's the guy you should bring in. I don't know if he's going to blow you away and win that job, but I want to find out. I mean, the Houston Texans, from 1 year of him being a backup, 1 year of being a backup, brought him in twice for a head coach interview and wanted to give him a job because they liked so much what they saw him as 1 year as a backup quarterback there within the organization. Now, the Houston Texans aren't necessarily, especially back then, known for their for how well they were as a well-run organization. So take it for what it is. But, since then, McCown has, he's earned his keep in this league. I think that would have been a little ridiculous to do that at time. I don't think it would have worked out well, to be honest with you, but he got that quarterback coach job. And more importantly, he's gotten the quarterback coach job the last couple of years with Kevin O'Connell, who I see as, a top 5 coach in football right now. I think that's a great thing for him. And like you said, look, you could go and, a team could, maybe not us, because, there's complications there. A team could hire a guy like Flores, and maybe Flores would bring McCown and be like, wow, what a staff. Flores finally has his offensive guy. Then a year later, if he sees some success, McCown is gone because he seems like the guy that's next up. And
I think people want to hire him as head coach. They're just waiting,
Yeah, they don't
somebody's going to eventually do it.
But sometimes you're better being too early than too late. And I think McCown could be that. And he's at the end of the day, I want the New York Giants to have a very wide search for their head coach position. And interviewing guys like Jeff Stoutland and especially a guy like Josh McCown would give me a lot of confidence that they're looking at this search from all angles. And I would not be mad if they came out of that with like, I know we've gone down this road a little bit with a guy like Joe Judge, but I think this is a little different. And
yeah, I mean, Joe Judge didn't have any discerning strategy to him other than we think that he's the next Bill Belichick. Like, it was some crazy view. There was not one thing he did outstanding. He was a special teams coach and one who didn't have a lot of experience, right? So like there wasn't a lot there. With just like with Stoutland, where it's clear the philosophy is we want him here to build up the trenches and be a dominant run force and build outward from there. With McCown, the philosophy is we want him to turn our talented young quarterback into a top 10 NFL quarterback and build a balanced passing offense, a modern West Coast offense, but mainly develop that quarterback into a franchise quarterback. Because if we can do that, almost everything else flows from there, right? If you can hit on the quarterback at a high level, everything else becomes a lot easier, right? Your floor as an organization is raised substantially when you do that. There's no bigger thing you can do, honestly. So I think the philosophy is that. So when you have a wide search, if you look at a guy like Stoutland for the trenches, you look at a guy like, Flores or some of these other, or Minter for, making the defense the foundation of what you're doing. A guy like McCown is all about Jackson Dart. That's what he's about, right? It's about building your franchise quarterback. And I would love for them to at least consider that. I'm not shying away from it because the Brian Daboll experiment has failed. I don't think the Brian Daboll experiment failing means that the approach is failed. I think he individually just proved to not be a very good head coach. I don't think the idea of him is wrong because you know who was hired the same time as Brian Daboll? Kevin O'Connell, and he proved to be a very good head coach and a very good developer of quarterback play. So sometimes you just miss on the guy, but I think the approach is sound.
Yep. No, I agree with you. So yeah, man, that is our head coach candidates.
Only an hour and 46 minutes for that.
Yeah, we took a while for that, but we can get into the GM candidates here, but definitely some interesting names there, man. And we only have for a preview, like that's just scratching the surface. We'll have more to talk about when we get closer to it.
So let's plow through the GM guys, right? I want to go through them and give them their due. It won't be the same level of discussion about scheme and things like that, but I think they're interesting candidates worth discussing. And I think we'll probably have to do a GM episode again, is my guess, right? And later in the season, and we will for all of this stuff. But as an introductory episode in talking about GM candidates, we broke these into a couple of categories as well. So we have the player personnel background guys, one each there. We have the cap guru guy, contracts background guy. And then we have a retread GM category and wild card. So those are our four. So we have 8 guys. Why don't you start with your player personnel guy, give a little background on him, and then I'll do mine.
Sure. So this is somebody who I've been high on for a couple of years now. And I think I think a lot of the guys that we've been talking about since we interviewed Gettleman the first time to interviewing Shane, there's a lot of guys who kind of stuck around through all that. And we're really around all the way up until last year. Like Borgonzi felt like kind of like the last of that group. So now we're kind of in a new wave of names to talk about here. And the guy that I really want to talk about here is Andy Weidl, the assistant GM over in Pittsburgh, and he is really their draft guy. They promoted they promoted from within, who was really like their cap guy. So they brought in Andy Weidl to run the draft. And Andy Weidl actually started out in Pittsburgh. He's a Pittsburgh local. From 1998 to 1999, he kind of started out there. Then he went over to the Saints from 2000 to 2004. And then he really kind of hit his stride with the Ravens. And I love that Ravens tree. I think they're just, they work this NFL system from a cap, from a comp formula, from a draft standpoint, better than anybody out there. And he did that. He cut his teeth there from 2005 to 2015. And then the Philadelphia Eagles, who smartly really pillaged that Baltimore Ravens front office. They took so many good, talented people from that, as they should, and added him to their front office because they thought he was talented. So 2016, 2021, rising to VP of player personnel, very high role. And then, then in 2022, when Kevin Colbert stepped down and they promoted from within, they hired him, Andy Weidl, back to Pittsburgh to be their assistant GM. This is a guy who through his first couple drafts has looked really good. They went out and got like a guy like Zach Frazier. They got was it Connor McGovern? They got Troy Agnew. They kind of rebuilt that O-line, and almost in 1 year they really looked impressive early on. And between the Steelers, who I think is a well-run organization, from the Eagles, who are obviously, if it's not the Ravens, it's the Eagles, and there's a lot of crossover there for as far as the model for these front office. So those are guys that I want to be picking from. I think the guy who has a little bit of that analytical and cap approach, but more of a draft guy. And this is a guy who got he was credited with guys like Timmy Jernigan, Kyle Juszczyk, Haloti Ngata, Torrey Smith, Tyrod Taylor. He has had success, and this is who I would look at to come in and be our next GM. And I think that it would work with some of the guys we mentioned, like a Minter, like a Flores, like a Harbaugh. I think there's a lot of connections there. So yeah, Andy Weidl's my guy.
Oh, he's a great candidate. I'm not going to say much because I want to get through these guys, but I think he's an outstanding candidate. He's going to be a hot name in this cycle for sure. I believe, at least. I'm going to go to my guy here from the player personnel background. And I think it's a guy who Giant fans have discussed a little bit in the past. Mm-hmm. And it's the current assistant GM for the Detroit Lions, Ray Agnew. Ray Agnew is a guy who was a former NFL top 10 pick by the Patriots back in 1990. Actually played for the Giants for 2 years, 95, 96 as a defensive tackle. He was an NC State graduate. Played for 10 years in the NFL. Yeah, he's got some Giant ties. Finished his career the last 3 years as a player with the Rams, the St. Louis Rams, with Curt Warner, won a Super Bowl there, retired. And then he came back to the pro personnel side of things in 2017 with the Rams under Sean McVay. Spent 4 years there. And then when Brad Holmes was hired by the Lions in 2021 as their GM, he brought Ray Agnew with him as his assistant. And I mean, we don't have to go through it, but we all know that the Detroit Lions were a dumpster fire before Brad Holmes got there. And their drafts have been go back and look at their drafts. They have been home run after home run after home run. Their pro personnel decisions, everything they've done, and they've turned them into a perennial Super Bowl contender. Ray Agnew is a big part of that. He's a big part of the draft process. Now, Brad Holmes is very involved in the draft. It's not like he's one of these execs who doesn't get involved in the draft in the details of scouting. He is, by background, a guy who does that. But Ray Agnew is a big part of that as well. He's a pro personnel guy who is very heavily involved also in the draft. So that's what I'm looking for here. I think this is a guy who you bring in because he has that tie to the McVay tree. Now the Brad Holmes tree, essentially. He brings probably the ability to bring in coaches from that McVay, Shanahan type tree. They are probably going to be philosophically aligned to some extent, like the Ben Johnson types, right? Also, it's a slightly different approach, but creative offense. They think a little bit outside the box in the way they bring in players. They got criticized for the way they approached, for example, the 2023 NFL draft. But at the end of the day, they took Jahmyr Gibbs, who's looking like one of the best running backs in the NFL and an all-pro. They took Jack Campbell in the first round. Then they took Sam Laporta, followed by Brian Branch. I mean, they've had hit after hit after hit after hit, and they have developed a great roster. This is a guy who knows who has experience not only building through the draft, but also adding guys in free agency to supplement that very well, putting rosters together. So from that perspective, Agnew, I think, is probably ready. He's put in his time. I do think he's going to be an NFL GM at some point. And to me, he's one of the top candidates that I'm looking for in an NFL GM. And with my slant towards these kind of McVay, Shanahan, West Coast type guys, I think he's a perfect GM combination for them.
Yeah. So I haven't been as high in Ray Agnew as some others, and it's hard to really make a strong stance on these GMs because we just don't know enough about them. It's a lot easier to make a stance on these coaches and how you stand, but I'll just tell you my hesitancy with Ray Agnew. Ray Agnew has been working in the front office since 2017. He has less than a decade of experience working in a front office. He was previously the team pastor. And then he moved into the front office. And obviously Ben Holmes had a lot of trust in him, and they've done a great job there at Detroit and brought him over as assistant defensive court or assistant GM. But here the thing is this guy's a 57-year-old guy who has less than a decade in experience in the front office, and with how many people have been cutting their teeth in this league for 30 plus years, probably 20 years younger than him at this point. It's not enough experience for me. And I wonder if he's more of a just situation of circumstances. And it's not, and I understand that's kind of what I'm saying when I'm saying, hey, we'll go from a Baltimore dream, but it's different to me when it's built over a 20-year success than a flash in the pan of Detroit having some success here for a few years.
Yeah. And that's a process that you're going to have to vet out during the interviews, right? How much of it do you think is this guy versus not this guy? But I think he's a name that he's going to have to get interviews. He's going to have to be viewed because just the track record is tremendous, the tree comes from. So those are our two personnel guys. Again, in the interest of time, let's jump into the next category, which is our cap guru contract background guys. And I think these are really fascinating names. So I think your guy is kind of both our guy, but yeah. You got first. So you go through him and then I have another one.
Yeah. So this is a guy that Sal and I have talked about for a while as somebody we'd be interested if we didn't move on from Joe Schoen. And that's Tony Pastoors. He's the senior operating officer over with the LA Rams. He oversees operations and acquisitions. This is a guy who's been twice named to the 40 under 40 list from the Athletic. Very, very young and promising guy. Back when, the Rams started to have all that success. If you remember, it wasn't built off of drafting. That has been a new development where they've really shown their ability to draft and how good they are. And that is not where Pastoors is. He's not their draft guy. But what he is he helped organize the F them picks model that won them their Super Bowl. He helped, facilitate those trades, facilitate that salary cap. He's a guy who helped, build what the LA Rams are today. He's a guy who interviewed and brought in Sean McVay. He is, considered one of the most important people and brightest minds in that front office, who is trusted extremely by Sean McVay and Les Snead. He is considered kind of like that third man there. They really do look at him like that from everything that I've read on him. He orchestrated the Stafford trade. He brought in Von Miller. He brought in Odell Beckham. He got extensions for Stafford. You got extensions for Kupp. I mean, this is the guy who is really just knows the cap game when we get there, and we're ready to do that, and can orchestrate these trades like nobody else. And obviously, you got to bring in a draft guy with him, but he's a part of a Rams front office that is drafted very well, and I'm sure he'd have somebody in mind to do that. So, absolutely one of the a guy who bring a great, fresh, young approach to this front office, and a guy you absolutely got to interview, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, we've loved Pastoors. I think he comes from a great background. He's put in the work. I'd be thrilled, right? And he's an executive, and I think he'd be somebody I'd strongly consider. I'm going to go to mine. I know we're at about the 2-hour mark or close to it. Still a lot of people here, and I appreciate you guys. This is a name I almost guarantee you nobody's been talking about it, nobody's heard of, and I wanted to go through it. He's more than a contracts cap guy. In fact, he's not an active NFL cap guy. He was a former NFL cap guy for years under the Philadelphia Eagles under Howie Roseman. And the guy I chose is a gentleman named Jake Rosenberg. Jake Rosenberg, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. He's a young guy. but he was a former commodities trainer who joined the Eagles as an executive in 2012. He's a former UPenn grad, economic, financial investments, went from that career to being an exec under Howie Roseman in 2012. VP, and he was an executive for the Eagles for 12, 13 years. He was VP of football administrations from 2018 to 24. And his job was specifically manage the cap and manage contracts, something we talk about all the time. How is it that the Eagles do so well at managing the cap? They have all these stars. They manage to pay them. I mean, granted, they play a lot of finagling with, years down the line, void years, things like that. But they ultimately succeed at their goal, which is putting together a very high-level roster. He was a big part of that. He did the cap work and the financial work for Howie Roseman. So I think Rosenberg's interesting. What I really found fascinating about him, though, Monty, is that in 2024, Rosenberg left the Eagles to become a founding partner at a consulting firm called the Athlete Group. I don't know if you got a chance to look into the Athlete Group at all, but did you look into it at all?
No.
Yeah. So the Athlete Group is really fascinating. The Athlete Group is a consulting firm with Rosenberg that basically is a strategy group, a financial strategy and competition-based strategy group, specifically catering to college football programs in the era of NIL. So they focus on how to manage NIL contracts, bring talent to, just like it's like a pro team, right? Managing NILs, managing strategic partnerships, bringing in investments, doing things to make programs more successful in the NIL era. He is now like a big-time consultant working with different college programs. Oklahoma is exclusively working with him to help draw talent and build up their program. You almost need these kinds of NFL cap type expertise guys to do this. And he was smart and got into that industry. He's doing it now. So he will not only have had many years of experience as an executive dealing with the cap for a successful organization with the Philadelphia Eagles, but now he's going to have experience running a consulting firm dealing with college athletes, and the entire process from like high school recruitment of NILs upward. This is a guy who's fully entrenched in the world of finances when it comes to players from high school onward. And he's basically building his resume up to be like that high-level executive that takes over an NFL organization. And it's a fascinating person. I found a tweet of his from the beginning of this year, which I found fascinating, and I think it's something to think about. And I think this was during the hiring period in January of 2025. This tweet said, and I'll read it to you guys, "Of all the words used to support head coaching or GM candidates or pairings between them, quote, familiarity seems the most overvalued. While it is nice to see a friend on your first day of work, after a month, you've made many others. Is a pre-existing friendship relevant when hiring someone to, in capital letters, lead an organization?" That sounds like a philosophical match for the Maras, honestly, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're less interested in like that kumbaya friendship and synergy between the general manager and head coach. They're looking for an executive. And I think if you want a salary cap, financial, run the organization executive, independent of your head coach, but a reliable person, this is probably a rising star. So keep this name on your radar, folks. I doubt anybody's talked about him yet, but let us be the first. Jake Rosenberg, formerly of the Eagles, now currently a consultant for the Athletes Group, working with college athletes, college programs.
And another guy who I'm sure would have no issue finding a draft guy.
Nope, none at all. That's what he does now.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go to the retread GMs.
All right. So let's get through this. So retread GM, same idea as the head coach, somebody who's done it and was let go or whatever, for whatever reason. I went with Rick Smith, the former Texans GM. Actually was technically never fired. He actually stepped away because his wife had cancer and just never stepped back into football. He was a Broncos assistant from 1996 to 1999 under Mike Shanahan, and then pro director, pro personnel 2000-2005, and then went with Gary Kubiak over to the Texans from 2006 to 2017 to be their general manager. Over there, if you guys remember correctly, they struggled with quarterbacks for a long time, but they did draft very well. They got the likes of J.J. Watt, Dwayne Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, got a guy like Arian Foster as an undrafted free agent. They found a lot of stars while he was the general manager over there. And I'll mention one story that I loved hearing from Rick Smith. I was listening to it on a podcast at one point. Obviously, the Sean Watson era did not work out for a variety of reasons, but it was a very talented quarterback when at the beginning of that era. And essentially, he was the guy that they identified and everybody liked in that room, but they picked very high up in that draft. And he was talking to Bill O'Brien and others and was like, what are we paying to get up to get him? They did not want to give up the first round pick to move up. That was where everybody was drawing the line. And he heard from Browns they needed a first round pick to move off that. He walked away at discussion, made the move, made the trade, came back to the room and said, sorry guys, it's my job. I gotta make this move. He's a guy who had struggled for a long time finding a quarterback. He found his guy and he put his reputation on the line and made that trade for a guy he believed in. I love that story. Again, obviously, it worked out and then didn't, but Rick Smith, I think, is a guy, especially with the Shanahan guy, that could work out. He has that maybe with Klint Kubiak, that maybe that's the fit right there. Worked with his father. I could see it with a guy like Kyle Shanahan if he ever shake loose. I don't think that will be this year if it happens, but I certainly think that's a guy to keep an eye on if he wants to come back to potentially work with one of these Shanahan guys.
Yeah, no, I think he's a good candidate. And I think he's one of the few ones that were worthy of discussing in this retread category. There's not a lot of great retread GMs when you look. This is a hard category to find somebody in that you actually want to discuss. And you're going to see that in the guy I chose because there's not a lot of guys to pick. So I picked a retread that's going to, it's along the lines of my other retread. And it's hand in hand. I picked Rob Saleh for the retread head coach to consider. I'm picking Joe Douglas as the retread GM. People are going to want to vomit when I say it, but again, Joe Douglas, his career he started as a Ravens scout for 15 years from 2000 to 2015, went on to become the director of scouting for the Bears in 2015, became the Eagles vice president of player personnel from 2016 to 2019, worked directly under Howie Roseman, which is good for him. That's great for his career. And then went on to become the Jets GM from 2019 to 24, lost his job famously when he and Rob Saleh were fired last year, went back to the Eagles. He's now a senior advisor to Howie Roseman. Had some good draft picks while he was the Jets. They had that famous 2022 draft where he got guys like Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jeremiah Johnson. Am I saying his name right? Not Jeremiah Johnson.
Jermaine Johnson.
Jeremiah Johnson was a Robert Redford movie character. Sorry. Good movie, by the way. Jermaine Johnson, Breece Hall. With the Eagles, he was part of the team that drafted Alshon Jeffrey. Didn't have the greatest record. He had a very bad losing record with the Jets, 32-68. But he was a guy that helped build that Super Bowl 52 team with the Eagles, the 2017 Carson Wentz, Nick Foles team. He was a big part of building that up and adding depth players to it. He had his experience as a GM. Another guy, like if you want to go down the retread pathway, he's a guy that comes really from a lot of training with Howie Roseman, cut his teeth already. And I think for the most part, he is respected as a good player personnel type guy and a decent draft guy. I don't know much about him as an executive, but I think from a scouting standpoint, he is a strong candidate. I don't think he'll get a job as a GM anytime soon, but I think he's somebody that would be on the radar of teams at least.
I love my Baltimore Ravens guys, and we've talked about it ad nauseum at this point. And
yeah, I mean, he's basically an Ozzie Newsome guy,
Yeah, he is. And as the Eagles do, they pillaged that front office for good talent. They brought in Joe Douglas. That's what they did. And you'll see it all over these guys. Like Ian Cunningham, we're not talking about him, but we could have. He's another guy, Ravens, then Eagles. And maybe there's a world you hire a guy like, hey, we talked about Andy Weidl We talk where I just mentioned Ian Cunningham. Maybe this is a guy who you bring as an assistant GM, a guy who's had experience, a guy who is clearly a talented, he's a good talented evaluator, but struggles some other areas. And, maybe you do make the leap in Joe Douglas. Maybe, I certainly am not going to rule him out from being successful GM. And I'll be honest, I think that more GMs deserve a second opportunity. I don't understand why they don't, because head coach can figure out the second time around. I don't understand why a GM can't figure it out around. It's obviously not the sexy hire, but I wouldn't fault a team who wanted to give him another shot. But I don't think that's likely. But I would certainly be very excited about him as an assistant GM or some sort.
As with Rob Saleh, I think these are two men who actually deserve a second shot and I think they're good at their craft. And I think a lot of the reason they did not perform well is because they were on the Jets, and the Jets have meddlesome ownership and a lot of institutional problems that I think make it hard to work there. The problem with these guys when it comes to Giants is they're likely to face a very similar dynamic. And I don't know. They've already kind of proven they struggle in that dynamic. So are they the right man? Probably not. But I think they're candidates worthy of considering based on their overall track record. So they're interesting. All right, we're at 2 hours and 10 minutes. So we're chugging along here. We got two more guys to go through, and these are fun. And for those of you who stuck it out, thank you. These are our wildcard GM people, and these are just completely like off the rip. Like we made these up almost. Guys who nobody would consider GM candidates right now, but maybe they should. And so why don't you go with your wild card guy first, and then I'll do mine.
Yeah, so this is kind of a wild card GM guy I've been talking about for a long time. And I think he's an interesting guy who deserves, actually did get an interview finally last year. And I think deserves interviews in the NFL. And that's Jim Nagy. And many of you know him as the guy who ran the Senior Bowl for many years. But before then, he was a long time NFL scout. From 1996 to 2017, he worked for the Packers, for Washington, for the Patriots, for the Chiefs, for the Seahawks. And that time was a very successful, has 4 rings on his fingers. That's all you can say. Like, he's part of very successful teams. He was part of the Packers for Super Bowl. He's part of the Patriots for 2 Super Bowls, and was part of the Seahawks for another Super Bowl. Everywhere he went, he saw success, and he's seen what winning looks like. You obviously love to see that part of it, but I think what's really interesting about Jim Nagy is he has worked with so many front office people around the league, from just simply people having to work with him. Running the Senior Bowl is like one of the biggest scouting events every single year. He got to know every scout, every GM, every executive, because they wanted to, get these guys with Jim. But Jim also talked to every college coach, because every college coach wanted to get their guys with Jim. He got to know those guys on a next level. And also, when these guys got fired, when these front office gets cleared out, he offered an opportunity for these guys to rehabilitate their career and put them on the Senior Bowl staff, where they scouted for this and brought people into the Senior Bowl. They had a real NFL-like program here, scouting for the Senior Bowl, deciding who to bring in there. And they found a lot of hidden gems over the years that people discover at the Senior Bowl. They do real world scouting, and not just for the high level guys. They find those gems. That's what the Senior Bowl is all about. And since then, I wasn't sure if he'd ever leave that. It seems like a passion project for him, but he did. I mean, he took the GM job for Oklahoma, which, maybe is going to be an interesting twist in these GM searches, because, within an NIL world, you're seeing more of these GMs appear all over college football. And Jim Nagy is one of them. And this experience, I think, will help him in other aspects of the job. But I think from the people he knows, and just the overall experience he has scouting, from as an actual NFL scout to leading the scouting at the Senior Bowl, I think he makes a fascinating candidate.
he is really interesting because he has intimate knowledge of every college program out there in the Power Fives, certainly, and a lot of FCS programs too, finding talent. And he has what he has is, he has a staff of people who help him find that talent. And I think he taps into that expertise. Now he's the Oklahoma GM you mentioned, and I think college teams need a guy like Jim Nagy, but the natural progression is eventually for him to go to the NFL and take his expertise as a general manager there. So he's a very interesting wild card. I don't think he's quite ready for it yet. I think he's going to have to probably put in a little bit more time. But you know what? If your philosophy is, I just want somebody who's going to nail the draft, he's going to know these prospects inside out, and he's going to have access to information that other teams have to kind of pay consultants to get, and he has that intimate knowledge, because the probability of success in the draft, I think, goes up substantially with a guy like Nagy. And that's your approach with him, right? He is a guy that he's going to build your roster through knowledge of the draft and maximizing the value of your draft picks.
And note the other thing I think to add to that is a guy that you really feel good can build a diverse, good front office. He knows so many people, and he has so much more knowledge on doing with other people, and a guy who, can reach out and get a trade done. He has connections all over the league. That, I feel like that's, those are underrated aspects of this guy, which is, he has things that other GM candidates just do not and will never have. It makes him so interesting.
Well, you definitely got one of the most interesting guys on our list. I'm going to throw out my wild card now, and this is our final GM candidate of the final person review today at 2 hours and 15 minutes. This is the last guy we're going over, period. And my wild card GM choice along those same lines is, if people are going to lose again, they're going to be like, what? It's actually Dan Jeremiah. Yes, that Dan Jeremiah, the NFL draft analyst. He has a very interesting background, Monty. So Dan Jeremiah was a college quarterback at Northeastern Louisiana and Appalachian State. Went on to become a college scout right away for the Baltimore Ravens. Personal assistant, then a West Coast scout for years. He worked with the Ravens for about 4 years, again, under the Ozzie Newsome tree of scouting and finding players. He went on to then join the Browns organization as a national scout for a couple of years, and then went to the Eagles and spent 3 years as a West Coast scout there. Now he's a San Diego guy. He lives out there with his 4 kids. His father lives out there. I think his father's part of a church, and he's very involved in that community. I don't think he wants to necessarily leave San Diego, but along the same lines as a wild card like Nagy, Jeremiah is a guy who knows college prospects very well. Now, a lot of it does come from his relationship with other scouts, right? But my goodness, Dan Jeremiah is a guy that, as you mentioned, has relationships. He has relationships around the NFL with scouts, executives. He can build a staff of outreach to find college players and build through the draft very aggressively. He does not have the executive experience some of the other guys do. But again, philosophically, both of our wild cards are guys who can build the organization from the draft up. I think these are guys who will know more about college prospects coming out than almost any of the other executives we're talking about, because those guys rely on second and third hand information from guys like Jeremiah and Nagy. And I think Jeremiah is a respected guy from his time in the NFL. So he's my wild card. I don't know if he's ever going to do this. I think he's pretty happy in his role, but you never know. Sometimes these guys are so well thought of. Somebody taps him on the shoulder and says, do you want to join an NFL front office in some capacity? And a guy like Jeremiah, I don't know if he'd want to go and be an assistant GM. I think he'd say, I'm not leaving my NFL gig for anything less than GM,
I don't remember the exact fact it was, but it was something along the lines like this, just how good Jeremiah is. This a couple years ago, I believe it was, he went 50 for 50. I think his top 50 on his big board went not the exact order, but the exact 50 players with the top 50 picks in the NFL.
Insane.
It was either that or top 50 in the first 2 rounds, something along those lines. But I think it was 50 and 50. It's that is not easy. And that, you see a lot of these media guys struggle, and they don't see it the same way the NFL does. Jeremiah can see it just as they do, and he doesn't get tricked like those guys do, typically.
To get production like me, to get a result like that, it means not only do you understand the players, you understand the competition, you understand the teams, who they value, who they're going to go after. You have intimate knowledge of the field, and you have intimate knowledge of the rest of the league. And I think that's a competitive advantage if you're working for one team, right? In some capacity, whether it's a GM or whatever. I'm saying in a GM role. But again, these are guys who I think can nail the draft and have a competitive advantage over their teams. And that is fundamentally the best way to build your organization up. It has guys who can nail the draft. You know, you can miss on a lot of other things, but as we're learning, you miss on draft picks, you're pretty much screwed. There's not much you can do. If you nail draft picks, your floor as an organization is high. You don't have to be beholden to massive contracts and free agency. You're just good at drafting. So those are our guys. So again, long episode, 2 hours. We're approaching 2 hours and 20 minutes. Getting back to our roots here. You know, yeah. we've been doing these in an hour lately. But again, a lot of guys we went over. We're going to put in the timestamps. So for those of you who want to go back and reference it, we'll have the timestamps for every single head coach and GM candidate. And hopefully you guys get a chance to review it and think about it. And, you know, I hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll obviously do more of these as we get closer to the end of the season. We wanted to start the process and honestly be the first group of guys to actually go through this in depth for everybody. So I hope you like it. Please share it when the episode comes out. It is going to be on, as you know, YouTube. It'll also be on Apple, Spotify. You'll always find our episodes on all of those platforms. Please like before you leave here today. Like the episode, leave comments. And if you haven't, please subscribe. We are getting close to 1,000 subscribers. That does help our algorithmic growth on YouTube. So please hit the like and subscribe button. You can always reach us at He's a Giant Pod on Twitter. You can reach me at Queens_guy. Reach Monte at MONTE. CRI5TO. I am not going to go over the college games this week because there's just too much, and I think we're pretty long over. Yeah. You guys can figure out the games, but we have a big game tomorrow night with the Giants and Eagles, and you know, there are some rumblings that if things don't go well, we might see some changes. So some of the stuff we talked about today could become relevant sooner than expected. We hope to see you guys next week when we get back to going over prospects, and we'll see what happens after the Eagles game as the Giants enter their mini bye. Until then, we're going to close it out. Monty, you have any closing thoughts?
No, it was a good episode. And, you know, like you said, a little bit of a mini bye here. So, you know, keep an eye out. If this game goes bad, I think there's going to be some firing. So
remember, like, subscribe, share the episode when it comes out, share it on YouTube, share it on Twitter, or whatever you can do. Help us grow. And we will keep this stuff going until we see you guys next week. Go Giants.
Go Giants.